The key was so small it could have fit inside a teaspoon. And yet the moment her 7-year-old daughter pressed it into her palm, Rachel Mercer felt the entire weight of her life shift. Lily had found it wedged behind a loose floorboard in the upstairs hallway of the old house, the one Rachel had inherited from a great-aunt she'd only met twice. The brass head of the key was tarnished green at the edges, but the inscription was clear, unmistakable, impossible. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. 5 letters cut deep into the metal. The same 5 letters Rachel had been signing on rent checks and pink slips and overdue notices her entire adult life. Mercer. Their name was on a key Rachel had never seen, for a door she had never opened, in a house she had inherited only 6 weeks ago. And Lily, with the matter-of-fact certainty only 7-year-olds possess, looked up at her mother and said the words that would change everything. "Mama, this key has our name on it." Rachel didn't speak. She couldn't, because somewhere inside that house, behind a wall she had walked past 100 times without noticing, was a door this key was built to open. And what waited behind that door would not only rescue them from the eviction notice that had chased them out of Pittsburgh, it would prove that the entire town of Westborough had been wrong about the Mercers for nearly 100 years. 6 weeks earlier, Rachel had been wiping down Booth 7 at Daly's Diner on Forbes Avenue when her phone buzzed for the 3rd time in an hour. She let it go to voicemail again. She knew the number. She knew the voice that would be waiting on the other end if she picked up, and she knew the dollar amount, $1,847.16, 3 months of back rent on a 1-bedroom apartment with a leaking radiator and a refrigerator that hummed like a small airplane. There was no point in answering a phone call she couldn't afford to receive. She slid the rag into her apron pocket and refilled the coffee for the man at the counter who had been nursing the same cup for 2 hours. Daly's was the kind of diner that had been there since the 70s, with cracked vinyl booths the color of old salmon and a counter rimmed in stainless steel that had been polished by elbows for half a century. Rachel had worked there for 9 years. She had started the week she got married, when she was 21 and convinced the wedding ring on her finger meant the diner was a temporary arrangement, a side gig, a thing she would leave behind once Tom finished his apprenticeship and they started the real life. The real life had never arrived. Tom had finished his apprenticeship, climbed the ladder at the union electrician's outfit, and then, 18 months ago, climbed straight out of their marriage and into a studio apartment in Lawrenceville with a yoga instructor named Brooke who was 26 and had a tattoo of a hummingbird on her collarbone. Rachel had found out by way of a credit card statement she wasn't supposed to see. That had been the end of a lot of things, and the beginning of others. The end of having 2 incomes. The end of pretending the marriage was salvageable. The end of bedtime stories that included a father's voice. The beginning, somehow, of being entirely on her own with a 5-year-old daughter who still asked, at first, when Daddy was coming home, and then later, with the slow heartbreaking practicality of children, stopped asking at all. Lily was 7 now. She had her father's brown eyes and her mother's stubborn chin, and she could read at a 5th grade level and tie a bowline knot because Mrs. Bowers, the after-school program coordinator at the YMCA, had taught her over the summer. Rachel paid the YMCA $120 a week to keep Lily fed and occupied until 6 o'clock most nights, and most weeks Rachel was at least 1 paycheck behind on the bill. The phone buzzed again. She glanced at the screen. Pittsburgh Property Management. She muted it. "You gotta pick that up sometime, honey," Jeanette said, sliding past her with a tray of pancakes balanced on one palm. Jeanette was 58 and had been at Daly's for 2 decades. She wore her hair in a tight gray bun and had a laugh like a screen door, and she was the only person in the world, possibly excepting Lily, that Rachel still trusted completely. "I will," Rachel said. "Just not today. You said that yesterday. And I meant it yesterday too." Jeanette gave her the look. The look had layers. The top layer was concern. The bottom layer was a kind of sad recognition. Jeanette had been a single mother once, 2, 3 sons, all grown now, one of them in the Navy, and one of them in Florida, and one of them she didn't talk about. She knew the math of single motherhood the way Rachel knew the menu at Daly's. By heart, in the bone. "You eat today?" Jeanette asked. "I had toast." "Toast isn't food, Rachel. It's bread that's been heated up. The dictionary says it's food." "The dictionary," Jeanette said, "is wrong." She disappeared into the kitchen and came back a minute later with a plate of scrambled eggs and 2 slices of bacon and slid it onto the counter in front of Rachel without a word. Rachel knew better than to argue. She ate standing up, leaning against the metal lip of the kitchen window, and watched the rain begin to streak the front window of the diner. October in Pittsburgh had a way of feeling like November. The light went gray by 4 in the afternoon, and the wet leaves stuck to the sidewalks in clumps the color of dried blood. The booths emptied out by 7. Rachel clocked out at 8:15, picked Lily up at the YMCA at 8:30, and drove home through streets where the street lamps haloed in the drizzle, and the city looked like an old photograph that hadn't been developed quite right. Their apartment was on the 3rd floor of a row house in Bloomfield, above an Italian bakery that smelled like fresh bread at 6 in the morning and burnt sugar by noon. The radiators hissed. The window in the kitchen didn't close all the way. There was a long scar in the linoleum where Lily had dropped a knife when she was 4 and screamed for 3 minutes thinking she had broken the floor permanently. The rent was $980 a month. Rachel had been paying it, more or less on time, since the divorce. She was no longer paying it. When they got home that night, the envelope was taped to the door. White, official, the kind of envelope you didn't have to open to know what was inside. Notice of eviction proceedings in red ink across the front. Lily, holding her mother's hand, looked up at it with the careful expression of a child who has learned not to ask certain questions until her mother's face tells her the question is allowed. "Mama, what's that?" "It's just a note from the landlord, baby." "Is it bad?" Rachel took the envelope down and slid it into the back pocket of her jeans without opening it. "It's nothing we can't fix." Inside the apartment, she made Lily a bowl of cereal because there was nothing else, and she sat at the kitchen table after Lily went to bed and stared at the eviction notice for 45 minutes without crying because she had decided 2 months ago, after the lights got cut off for a weekend, that she was no longer going to be a woman who cried over paperwork. Crying didn't pay the bill. Crying didn't move the calendar. She had 30 days. She made a list on a sheet of paper torn from Lily's spelling notebook. Across the top, she wrote options in block letters and underlined it twice. Sister's couch. Diane lived in Greensburg with her husband Mark, who didn't like Rachel and didn't pretend otherwise. Lily and Diane's 2 kids didn't get along. The couch was 3 days, maybe a week. Tom. Out of the question. He owed $12,000 in back support and had told her, the last time they spoke, that she should get a real job and stop playing victim. The shelter on Liberty Avenue. She had passed it on the bus 1,000 times. She knew herself well enough to know that walking through that door with Lily would break her in some place that didn't grow back. A second job. She already worked 52 hours a week. Her body was the only thing she owned, and it was already mortgaged. She stared at the list. None of the options were options. They were all just different sizes of the same drowning. That was when the second envelope arrived. It came 3 days later, on a Saturday morning, in a stack of mail Rachel almost threw away unopened because all of it looked like more bills she couldn't pay. The return address was a law firm. Stedman and Howell, attorneys at law, 14 Court Street, Westborough, Pennsylvania. Rachel had never heard of any of it. The firm, the street, the town. She made coffee and sat down at the kitchen table and opened it because she had nothing left to lose by opening envelopes. Dear Ms. Mercer, our firm represents the estate of Beatrice May Mercer, who passed away on August 17th of this year at her home in Westborough, Pennsylvania, at the age of 89. As you are listed as her sole surviving blood relative under the terms of her will, we are pleased to inform you that you have been named the principal beneficiary of her estate. Rachel read the line 3 times before any of the words connected to any other words. Great Aunt Beatrice. The name came back to her slowly, the way a name does when it has been buried under 20 years of silence. Beatrice was her grandfather's sister. Her grandfather had died when Rachel was 9, and Beatrice was the eccentric old aunt who lived somewhere in the middle of Pennsylvania and didn't drive and didn't have a phone and sent a Christmas card every year with 3 crisp dollar bills folded inside. Rachel had received those cards every December until she was about 15, and then they stopped, and Rachel had assumed Beatrice had died. She hadn't. She had simply gotten older and stopped writing. Rachel had visited her exactly twice. Once when she was 6, on a road trip with her mother, a long hot afternoon she could barely remember, a porch with peeling paint, the smell of cinnamon. and once when she was 23, 3 months pregnant with Lily, on a side trip during a weekend in Ohio. That second visit she remembered more clearly. Beatrice had been 76. Tall, thin, with white hair held back by tortoiseshell combs and gray eyes that didn't blink very much. She had served Rachel weak coffee in a delicate china cup and asked her one question, which was, "Are you happy?" Rachel had said yes. She had been, then. Beatrice had nodded once and said, "Good. Hold on to that." The Mercer women don't usually get to hold on to things. Rachel had not understood what she meant. She had never asked. She picked up the letter and kept reading. The estate consists of the real property located at 47 Bellweather Road, Westborough, Pennsylvania, including the residential dwelling, all outbuildings, and all personal property and contents of the household. The property is held free and clear of any mortgage. Probate has been completed, and the title may be transferred to you upon execution of the enclosed documents. Please be advised that the property has an assessed value of approximately $32,400 for tax purposes. The dwelling has not been significantly renovated since the 1940s, and the estate is being conveyed in as-is condition. The letter was signed by a man named Howard Howell, Esquire. $32,400. Rachel did the math, which had become a reflex, an itch under the skin. $32,400 was not enough to keep the apartment in Bloomfield. Not enough to clear the back rent. Not enough to start over somewhere nicer. Not enough to do anything except postpone the inevitable by about a year. If she sold it. If anybody wanted to buy an as-is house in a small town in central Pennsylvania, which she doubted. But the house was paid for. Free and clear. No mortgage. No rent. Just taxes and utilities, and probably some level of repair she couldn't begin to imagine. A roof. Heat. A backyard for Lily. A school that wasn't underfunded. A town where nobody knew her. She read the letter again. And then a third time. She did not cry. She had stopped crying over paperwork. But she sat at the kitchen table for a long time, and when Lily came padding out of the bedroom in her unicorn pajamas and asked what was for breakfast, Rachel said pancakes. Even though there was no syrup, even though there was barely enough flour, because suddenly pancakes felt like the right thing to make. That afternoon, she called Howard Howell. He had a thin, papery voice, and he asked her 3 questions to confirm her identity, and then he told her, in the careful, dry tone of a small-town attorney who had been doing this work for 40 years, that her great-aunt had instructed him to make sure the letter reached her personally, and that there were certain personal items in the home that the deceased very much wanted her to find. What kind of personal items? Rachel asked. There was a pause on the other end of the phone. Ms. Mercer, I was instructed by your aunt that those items were to remain in the house, undisturbed, until you came to claim them. She was very specific. I never went into the upper floors of the property myself. I cannot tell you what is there. I can only tell you she wanted you to find it. Rachel's hand tightened on the phone. What was she like? My aunt. Another pause. Longer. Beatrice Mercer, Howard Howell said, was the most particular woman I ever worked for. She was sharp as a tack until the week she died. And she was, if you'll permit me a personal observation, profoundly lonely. She lived in that house alone for 61 years. She had no friends in town. People generally avoided her, and she preferred it that way. Why did people avoid her? The lawyer cleared his throat. Ms. Mercer, the town of Westborough has a long memory and a long grievance against your family. You'll find that out for yourself if you decide to come. But I will say this. Whatever you may hear, your great-aunt was not what they said she was, and her father was not what they said he was. She was very firm on that point. Very firm. Rachel did not know what to say. She thanked him. He told her to come whenever she was ready. He would prepare the documents. She hung up the phone and looked at Lily, who was sitting on the rug in front of the television, drawing with markers on the back of an old utility bill because they were out of printer paper. Lily. Yeah, Mama. How would you feel about moving? Lily looked up. To where? To a house. A house with a yard. In the country. Lily considered this with the slow, thoughtful seriousness she brought to all major decisions involving snacks, bedtime, and the rearrangement of her stuffed animals. Would I have my own room? Yes. Would Daddy know where it was? Rachel hesitated. If he wanted to know, baby, he could find out. Okay, Lily said. She went back to her drawing. She told her sister the next day. Diane lived in Greensburg with Mark and the 2 kids, in a 3-bedroom split level with a pool that had been closed for the winter and a kitchen that always smelled vaguely of cinnamon air freshener. Rachel drove out on Sunday afternoon with Lily strapped into the back seat and the eviction notice and the letter from Howard Howell both folded together in her purse, because she had not yet decided which one she wanted to lead with. Diane was 4 years older than Rachel and had always been the responsible one, which she made sure Rachel knew at every available opportunity. She had married Mark, a regional manager at a building supply company, 3 months after college graduation, and she had never lived in an apartment, never had her electricity shut off, never been late on a mortgage payment, and she did not approve of women who had. She loved Rachel. She also did not entirely respect her. Rachel laid out both papers on the kitchen island. Diane read them in order, slowly, her face tightening as she went. "Oh, Ratch," she said. "Don't ratch me. 3 months of rent? 3. I know. How did this happen? Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I knew what you would say." "What would I say?" "You'd say what you always say. That I should have left him sooner. That I should never have stayed home that year when Lily was a baby. That I should have gone to law school. That I should marry someone with a steady job. That I should be more like you." Diane's mouth went thin. "That isn't what I would say. Diane, that is verbatim what you said in May when my heating bill was 3 months late." There was a silence. Diane picked up the second letter. She read it twice, the way Rachel had. When she put it down, she did not look relieved. She looked, if anything, worried. "You're not actually thinking about going." "I'm absolutely thinking about going. Rachel, it's the middle of nowhere. You said yourself you barely remember the place. You haven't seen this woman in 15 years. There's no money. The house is worth 32 grand, and it sounds like it's falling apart. What about Lily's school? What about your job? What about your life?" "What life, Diane? You have a life. I have an eviction notice and a daughter and $712 in my checking account. That isn't a life, that's a hostage situation. So move in here," Diane said, and Rachel knew immediately that her sister did not mean it, did not want it, was offering it because the script of being a sister required it. "Mark won't mind. Mark will mind. Mark already minds. Diane, I love you. But I can't sleep on your couch for 2 months while I get my feet back under me. The kids hate each other. Mark hates me. You'd hate me by week 3. I would hate me by week 1. So you're going to drag Lily to a town she's never heard of, with no friends, no support system, to live in a falling-down farmhouse you've never seen, owned by a woman you barely knew, in a place where, by the lawyer's own admission, people don't like your family. Yes, because of pride. Because it's mine." Diane stared at her for a long moment, and Rachel watched her sister's face do the thing it sometimes did when she was about to say something cruel that she would later apologize for. To her surprise, Diane did not say anything cruel. She said, quietly, "What if she left you nothing, Ratch? What if you get out there and it's just a pile of junk and you can't even sell the place? Then I'll have failed in a new zip code instead of this one." Diane laughed despite herself. It was not a kind laugh, but it was a laugh. "Mom would have hated this," Diane said. "Mom hated everything I ever did. That's not fair." "It's not unfair either." Diane looked at the letter again. Then she looked at Lily, who was in the living room watching cartoons with her cousins, who were politely tolerating her presence because their mother had told them they had to. Lily was sitting at a slight distance from them, alone on the rug, the way she always sat in groups, like a small, careful planet. "Just promise me," Diane said. "Promise me you won't sign anything until you've walked through the house. Promise me you'll call me if it's bad." "I will." "Promise me you'll keep your phone on." "I will." "And Ratch." "What?" "If she did leave you something real, you call me first. Not Tom. Not anybody. Me." Rachel almost smiled. There it was. Her sister, in one sentence. The love and the calculation, tangled together so tightly they couldn't be separated anymore. Maybe they never could have been. "I'll call you first," Rachel said. She told Jeanette on Monday at the diner. Jeanette did not cry, but she came close, which for Jeanette was a major event. She squeezed Rachel's hand across the counter and said, "Honey, if it's a graveyard out there, you come back. You hear me? You come back and I will personally drive to your old landlord's house and make him take you back at the old rate." Rachel laughed and said she would. Old Mr. Daly signed her last paycheck on Wednesday and added an extra $200 on top of what she was owed and refused to discuss it. By Friday, the Civic was packed. The drive took 4 hours and 40 minutes. Lily fell asleep somewhere around Murraysville with her head against the window and a stuffed rabbit pressed under her chin, and Rachel let her sleep all the way through Greensburg and Latrobe and past Johnstown, where the highway began to climb into the wooded folds of the Allegheny Plateau, and the trees turned gold and rust, and the air, when she rolled the window down to keep herself awake, smelled like cold leaves and wood smoke. She had loaded the Civic the night before with everything she could fit. Lily's bed, broken down, lashed to the roof. 2 suitcases of clothes. A box of kitchen things. A box of books. The framed photograph of Lily as a baby that had hung above the couch. The little wooden jewelry box that had been Rachel's mother's. 3 garbage bags of Lily's toys. Everything else, the furniture, the curtains, the cracked plates, all of it, she had left in the apartment for the landlord to throw away. She had paid the storage place $50 to take her bigger things into a unit, which she would deal with later, which she had not yet figured out how to deal with. Westborough sat in a hollow between 2 long wooded ridges, at the place where Bellweather Creek widened into a kind of pond before continuing south. The town had been a small mill town once. Lumber, mostly, then a wool mill that had run from 1872 until 1968, and after that not much. The downtown was 3 blocks of brick storefronts, half of them with paper in the windows, half of them still going. A diner called the Hollyhock, with a hand-painted sign. A hardware store. A pharmacy. A funeral home. A barber shop with a pole that didn't turn. A library in a Carnegie building with a sagging stone lion out front. A bank. A church with a white steeple. The kind of town that didn't need to introduce itself to itself. She stopped at the Gulf station on the edge of town to fill the tank and use the bathroom. The man behind the counter was somewhere in his late 60s, with the kind of weathered, careful face that small-town men acquire after 50 years of looking at the same people through the same window. He took her credit card and ran it and looked at her, and then he said, in a voice that was not unfriendly, but that was not friendly either, "Mercer." "That's me," Rachel said. He nodded slowly. "You'd be Beatrice's people, then." "Her great-niece. I came to take care of the house." "Take care of it how?" "Live in it. For now." He handed her the card back without looking away. "Folks know that house. Folks know that name. So I've been told." "You've been told the why of it?" "Some of it." He did not pursue it. He gave her a slow, considered look that was not quite hostile and not quite warning. He said, "There's milk and bread at the IGA on Cherry Street. They close at 8. She thanked him and went out to the car. Lily was awake now, blinking, rubbing her eyes. "Are we there?" "Almost, baby. Is it pretty?" Rachel looked through the windshield at the dim main street of the town in the late afternoon, the brick storefronts the color of dried red clay, the wind moving the last leaves on the maples along the sidewalks. "It's a town," she said. "It's something." Bellweather Road ran north out of town, a paved two-lane that gave up after about a mile and became gravel and then dirt. Rachel watched the numbers on the mailboxes count down. 71, 63, 55, 47. The mailbox at 47 was a black metal one on a leaning post, with the name Mercer stenciled in white letters that had been redone many times, the most recent layer over the older ones. The driveway was longer than the road in front of it. Maple trees lined both sides, untended for what looked like decades, their branches arching together overhead, so that driving down the driveway felt like driving down the nave of an enormous green cathedral with the roof half fallen in. The gravel had thinned to dirt in places. Rachel drove slowly, the Civic rocking through ruts. The trees opened. The house sat on a rise, surrounded by what had once been a lawn and was now a sea of waist-high goldenrod, ironweed, and the gray skeletons of last summer's milkweed. It was bigger than she had expected. 3 stories, with a 4th-story gable that pointed upward like the prow of a ship. Wraparound porch on 2 sides. Slate roof, patches of it black where shingles had slid loose. A round tower at the southeast corner with a stained glass window halfway up. The whole structure painted, once, a deep maroon, now bleached and peeled to the color of old wine left in a cellar for 40 years. The shutters hung open on rusted hinges. One of them had fallen off entirely and lay in the goldenrod like a broken wing. Lily, beside her, was very quiet. "It's huge," she said finally. "It's huge," Rachel agreed. "Is it ours?" "It's ours." "Mama." "Yes, baby." "There's a lady on the porch." Rachel had not seen her at first. She was tucked into the deep shade of the porch overhang, on a wicker rocking chair that had not been there in any of the photographs Howard Howell had emailed her. A woman, maybe 70, in a navy cardigan and a long denim skirt, with white hair that fell to her shoulders and a face like a folded paper bag, soft and lined and shrewd. She rose, slowly, as Rachel pulled the Civic up in front of the porch. Rachel got out. Lily stayed in the car for a long moment before she opened her door and stepped out into the long grass and stood very close to her mother's hip. "Mrs. Patterson?" Rachel said. The woman nodded. "You'd be Rachel. I'm Edith. I told the lawyer I'd watch for you. I live next door, which around here means a quarter-mile that way." She gestured up the road. "Thank you for waiting." "Wasn't waiting. I come over and sit on this porch most evenings. Have for the past 3 months. Force of habit." Rachel looked at her. Edith Patterson met her gaze without flinching. "You knew her well?" "Better than anyone in this town did, which is to say a little. Bea was not what you'd call easy, but she was mine to the extent she was anyone's. She wanted you to have the house. I told her you would come." "How did she know?" Edith Patterson smiled, just a little. "She didn't, child. She hoped. Come in. I left the front lamp on for you." She turned and walked back up the porch steps, which creaked beneath her in a register Rachel could feel in the soles of her own feet. Rachel took Lily's hand. The wind moved across the goldenrod with a long shushing sound, and from somewhere up in the maples a crow called 3 times and went silent. Rachel followed Edith Patterson into the house. The smell hit her first. It was the smell of every old house in Pennsylvania that has been lived in by one woman for 60 years and then left empty for 3 months. Beeswax, mothballs, dust, the papery sweetness of pressed flowers in old books, a faint underlayer of lavender from sachets that had been tucked into every closet and drawer since the Eisenhower administration. And underneath all of it, the cold, mineral smell of old wood and old plaster and a stone foundation that had been holding back the same hill for 140 years. The front hall was wide and dim. The wallpaper was a faded green vine pattern on a cream ground, peeling at the corners. A grandfather clock against the wall to the right had stopped at 3:47. On what day of what year Rachel could not guess. A staircase rose along the left wall, dark walnut, the carpet runner threadbare and tacked down with brass rods that were tarnished almost black. There was a hall tree by the door with 3 coats still hanging on it, all of them in the cuts and fabrics of decades Rachel had not been alive for. A wool overcoat, a summer linen duster, a long black thing that looked like it had been a riding coat once. She kept her father's coats, Edith Patterson said quietly, behind her. She kept everything of his. "Where's the kitchen?" "Through there. I'll show you." Edith walked her through the rooms one by one. The front parlor, with 2 enormous wingback chairs facing the fireplace and a glass-fronted cabinet full of small porcelain figurines, shepherdesses and milkmaids, and 1 delicate ceramic ballerina with a broken wrist that had been glued back on. The dining room, with a long oak table that could have seated 12 and never had, set with 2 place settings of cream china edged in pale gold, as if Beatrice had been expecting company that never arrived. The back parlor, smaller, warmer, with a velvet settee the color of dried blood and a wall of bookshelves that went floor to ceiling on 3 sides, packed with hardcover. Books bound in cloth and leather, the spines faded by a century of indirect light. A piano in the corner, an upright in dark wood, the keys yellowed. The kitchen, when they reached it, was a museum. A black cast-iron stove, the kind that burned wood, against one wall, with a more modern gas range beside it that had been added sometime in the 1950s and not updated since. A deep porcelain sink with a faucet that produced, when Rachel turned the handle experimentally, a rust-colored trickle that ran clear after about 30 seconds. A small refrigerator that hummed. Edith had filled it with the basics. Milk, eggs, a loaf of bread, a pound of butter, a small ham wrapped in waxed paper. "I thought you might be hungry," Edith said. Rachel had not eaten since a granola bar in the car somewhere outside Johnstown. She felt her eyes sting, and she did not let them. "Thank you. There's a chicken in the freezer if you want it tomorrow." Bea grew most of her own food until the last 2 years. "The garden is gone to seed, but the freezer's still full." "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. I knew her 30 years. She'd want you eating." Edith led her up the staircase. The second floor was a wide central hall with 4 doors off it. 3 bedrooms, all of them shut and undisturbed, the beds made with quilts that smelled faintly of cedar, a bathroom with a clawfoot tub and a pull-chain toilet. At the end of the hall, a narrow stair led up to the third floor, which Edith said was BA's study and her sewing room, and a small servant's bedroom from the house's earliest days that had been converted into a kind of glass-walled sunroom that looked out over the back ridge. The whole house? Rachel said. All this is mine. Every board, Edith said. There's no debt against it. Bea wouldn't have allowed a debt to live in this house. She used to say that a Mercer paying interest was a Mercer who had given up. She paid for everything in cash, even when it cost her dearly. There's no mortgage. There's no lien. The taxes are paid through the end of the year. Rachel stood in the upstairs hallway and felt something she had not felt in a long time and could not, in the moment, identify. It was not joy. Joy was too easy a word. It was something more like the absence of pressure, like a hand that had been pressed against her chest for 2 years suddenly easing, just a little. She turned to find Lily was not behind her. Lily? In here, Mama. She was in the third bedroom, the one at the front of the house, with a window that looked out over the maples and the long drive. The bed was a 4-poster with a faded blue quilt. The wallpaper was a pattern of small pink roses. There was a child's writing desk under the window, the surface scratched and stained, and on top of the desk, a small wooden horse on a wheeled base, the kind a child would have pulled around on a string 100 years ago. Is this a kid's room? Lily said. Edith answered from the doorway. It was Beatrice's room when she was a girl. She slept in it until she was 12. Then her father moved her into a bigger room down the hall, and she never came back to this one until after he died, and she only used it for storage after that. Can it be my room? Lily said. Rachel knelt down. It can be your room. The horse too? The horse too. Lily climbed onto the bed in her shoes, which Rachel decided not to fight about, not tonight, and put her hand on the wooden horse, and very gently, the way a child handles a creature she suspects might be alive, turned it once on its little wheels. Edith Patterson stayed for an hour. She showed Rachel where the well pump was, in case the water cut out, and the breaker box, and the trick of the back door, which only locked if you pulled it toward you slightly while you turned the key. She showed her how to light the gas stove with a long match because the pilot was unreliable. She left her phone number on a piece of paper on the kitchen table. At the door, she paused. Rachel. Yes. You're going to hear things in this town. About your family. About what your great-great-grandfather did, or didn't do, in 1929. People here have a story they like to tell themselves. You'll hear it within a week. What's the story? Edith Patterson's eyes, which had been steady and warm all evening, went hard for a moment. That's not my story to tell. But I'll tell you this. Beatrice Mercer lived in this house for 61 years and never once defended her father out loud to anyone in this town who wasn't worth defending him to. She defended him to me, and she was the most honest woman I ever met. You take that for what it's worth. She nodded once and stepped out into the dusk and walked down the long drive with her hands in the pockets of her cardigan. Rachel watched her go until the white head was just a small pale shape against the dark of the maples. Then she went back inside and closed the door. The first week was the cleaning week. Rachel got up at 6 in the morning, made coffee on the gas stove with the long match, and worked her way through the house with a bucket and rags and a roll of contractor bags. Decades of dust came up off the surfaces in dark, gummy films. The windows, when she wiped them, went from milky to clear, and the light that had been filtering through them all this time turned out to be honest October sun, the kind that picked out every grain in the floorboards and every crack in the plaster. Lily helped where she could. She dusted the lower shelves of the back parlor bookcases and pretended to be an explorer in the attic and made up stories about the porcelain figurines in the front parlor cabinet, all of whom she gave names. The ballerina with the glued wrist was Penelope. The shepherdess with the chipped lamb was Margaret. The milkmaid with the basket was, for reasons known only to Lily, Steve. By the end of the first week, Rachel had the kitchen, the front parlor, the back parlor, and both their bedrooms livable. The third floor she left for later. The rest she went through slowly, room by room, the way you eat a meal that's too large. On Monday of the second week, she put on her one clean blouse and walked into town and got the job at the Hollyhock. The owner was a woman named Doris Bell, who had bought the diner from her parents in 1989 and who hired Rachel after a 12-minute conversation in which she asked Rachel one question. Can you carry 4 plates? And Rachel had said yes. Doris paid her $12 an hour plus tips. The shift was breakfast and lunch, 5:30 in the morning to 2:30 in the afternoon, which meant Rachel could be home an hour before Lily got off the school bus at 3:40. She enrolled Lily at Westborough Elementary on a Tuesday, and Lily started on a Wednesday. The school was a low brick building from the 1950s with a flag in front and a playground that was made of metal and wood and looked, to Rachel's modern eyes, like a series of lawsuits waiting to happen. Lily came home from her first day with a friend named Emma, whose mother, Rachel learned later, was the daughter of the man at the Gulf station who had said her name like he was tasting it. The town was not friendly. The town was not unfriendly. The town was watching. At the Hollyhock, the regulars knew within 3 days that Rachel Mercer had taken over the house on Bellweather Road. Some of them were polite. Some of them looked at her, when she set their coffee down, with the careful expression of people who were trying to decide if she counted as a person or as the latest carrier of an old debt. An old man named Dale Harrow, who ate breakfast at the counter every morning at 6:15, said it out loud on her 5th day. "You're Beatrice's girl. Great niece." Same thing. Rachel did not respond. She refilled his coffee. "You know what your family did to this town?" "I have an idea." "You don't have an idea. You have a sentence." "I'll tell you the idea." In 1929, in the spring of that year, the bank in this town, the Westborough Citizens Bank, was robbed of every dollar of its depositors' money. Not by a robber, by its own president, Cornelius Mercer, your great-great-grandfather. He took $212,000 in cash, which in 1929 was an enormous sum, and he vanished. Walked out of the bank on a Friday afternoon and never came back. Half of this town lost their savings. Farmers lost their farms. 3 men killed themselves. The mill almost closed. Children went without shoes for a decade. He did that. Your family did that. His voice was not loud. He was not making a scene. He was simply telling her a story, the way someone might tell you the route to the post office. And your great-aunt, he went on, spent 60 years in that house up there pretending none of it happened. Refused to sell. Refused to speak about it. Refused to apologize for him. The Mercers stole the future of this town, and your aunt stayed put on the very ground where it happened, and you've just walked yourself into the middle of it. Rachel kept her hand steady on the coffee pot. She had grown up taking orders from drunk men in worse moods than this one. "I'm sorry for what happened to this town," she said. "You didn't do it. No, doesn't mean you don't carry it." He cracked his egg over his hash browns and ate without looking at her again. Rachel went on with her morning. Across the diner, a woman in her 50s caught her eye and gave her a tiny, almost invisible nod, the kind of nod that says, "I saw that, and I'm sorry," and Rachel filed that woman's face away as someone she might one day, possibly, trust. She walked home that afternoon down the leaf-littered sidewalks of Westborough and thought about Cornelius Mercer. She had never heard the name out loud before. She had not known her great-great-grandfather's name. She had not known her family had a name in this town at all. Beatrice had never written about it. Rachel's own grandfather had never told her. The story had been hidden from her by the simple expedient of distance and silence. She thought about Edith Patterson at the front door, saying she defended him to me, and she was the most honest woman I ever met. The 2 stories could not both be true. The town's and Beatrice's. Or maybe they could. She walked the rest of the way home in the kind of fall light that turns everything gold for 45 minutes and then goes out all at once. Lily was already at the kitchen table with Emma when she got in, the 2 of them coloring on the back of the contractor's estimate Rachel had requested for the roof and not yet been able to afford. Edith Patterson was at the stove making them grilled cheese sandwiches with the casual authority of a woman who had decided some time ago that this was now her business. "You look like you've had a day," Edith said. "Dale Harrow," Rachel said. "Oh, at the diner." "Oh." Edith flipped the sandwich. Dale's mother lost her parents' farm in 1930. He grew up hearing the story every Sunday at the dinner table. He's been carrying it for 70 years. He doesn't know how to put it down. "Is it true?" Edith Patterson looked at her, and her face did something complicated, and she said, "Parts of it. Not the parts that matter most. But that is not my story to tell. It's yours to find." She slid the grilled cheese onto Lily's plate. "Eat up, ladybug." October turned. The maples along the drive let go of their leaves in a single long, gold afternoon, and the wind went from cool to cold, and Rachel pulled the storm windows down in the kitchen and the parlor and learned how to run the old furnace in the basement, which clanked and shuddered and produced, eventually, a thin, warm breath of air through the cast-iron registers in the floors. She kept cleaning in the evenings, after Lily was in bed. She was working her way along the second-floor hallway, the long stretch of it between Lily's bedroom and the master at the end. The carpet runner was loose in places. She got down on her hands and knees with a screwdriver and started taking up the brass rods one by one so she could roll the carpet back and clean what was underneath. It was the kind of work that occupied her hands and let her mind run somewhere else. She thought, while she worked, about money, about the heating bill that was going to come, about whether the Civic would make it through one more Pennsylvania winter, about whether she should keep paying the storage unit in Pittsburgh or just let the rest of her old life go. It was a Sunday morning, the second Sunday in November, when Lily came running down the hallway in her socks at a speed that was not strictly safe. "Mama, Mama, Mama." Rachel sat up from where she was scrubbing a baseboard. "What?" "There's a noise. A noise. Under the floor. By my room. Listen." Rachel followed her daughter back down the hall. Lily got onto her knees and pointed. "Right here. Step on this part. Right here." Rachel stepped where she was pointing. The board sank, just slightly, with a hollow click, and rose again when she stepped off it. She had walked over it 100 times. She had cleaned every other board on this floor. This one she had skipped without realizing it because it was tucked under the slight overhang of the doorframe to Lily's room. "Hear that?" Lily said. "Yes. It's hollow." "Maybe." "Mama, it's hollow." Rachel got down on her hands and knees. The board was 9 inches wide, the same dark walnut as all the others, fastened down with old square-headed nails that were almost flush with the surface. 2 of the nails on the long edge of the board, she noticed when she looked closely, had been replaced at some point with smaller, newer nails. The kind of detail she would never have caught if she hadn't been kneeling there, eye level with the floor. She went down to the kitchen and got a butter knife and a flathead screwdriver. It took her almost 20 minutes. The board was tight. She pried gently, worked the screwdriver in along the seam, popped one nail, and then another. The whole board came up at once, with a small clean snap, and a draft of cold, dry, ancient air rose out from underneath. There was a cavity below the floor, maybe 8 inches deep, lined on 3 sides with old brick. And in the cavity, set on its side against the brick, was a small object wrapped in a square of dark blue velvet. Lily, who had been holding her breath behind her mother's shoulder, made a small sound that was halfway between a gasp and a giggle. "What is it?" "I don't know." "Open it." Rachel reached in. The velvet was cold to the touch, older than she was. She lifted the bundle out and felt the weight of it in her palm, a small dense weight, no heavier than a heavy spoon. She unwrapped the velvet on the floor between them, on top of the rolled-back runner, her hands steadier than she felt. The key was brass, ornate, about 3 inches long. The bow at the top of it was shaped not as a circle, but as a small carved oval, and on the oval, deeply incised, were 5 letters Rachel had been writing on receipts and rent checks her entire life. Mercer. For a long time, neither of them moved. Lily said, very quietly, "Mama, this key has our name on it." The hallway was very still. The November light came pale through the window at the end of it. Somewhere downstairs, the grandfather clock that Rachel had finally wound and gotten running ticked once, twice, 3 times. "I see that, baby. Why is our name on a key?" "I don't know." "Whose key is it?" "I don't know." "Where's the door?" Rachel looked at her daughter. Lily's face was bright. There was none of the wariness she had been wearing for 2 years, since Tom had left, since the lights had gotten cut off, since the eviction notice on the door. There was just a 7-year-old's enormous open question, made of equal parts wonder and patience. "Where's the door?" "Let's find out," Rachel said. They went through the house room by room. They tried the front door, which used a modern Schlage lock, no match. They tried the back door, the pantry, the basement door, which had a heavy iron lock, the right vintage but the wrong shape, the attic door at the top of the 3rd-floor stairs. They tried the cabinet locks in the dining room hutch. They tried the lock on the small writing desk in the back parlor. They tried, even, the lid of the piano, which had a tiny key slot, but the key was 3 sizes too big. By dinner time, Rachel had made grilled cheese for both of them, and Lily was asleep on the rug in the front parlor with the velvet square of cloth still in her hand. Rachel sat at the kitchen table and turned the key over in her fingers. She thought about the locked room Howard Howell had mentioned, about the personal items Beatrice had wanted her to find, About Dale Harrow at the counter of the Hollyhock, saying $212,000. About Edith Patterson, in this same kitchen, saying it's yours to find. She went back through the house with the key in her hand and a flashlight from the kitchen drawer. She started this time not at the doors, but at the walls. It was the back parlor where she found it. She had cleaned that room twice already. She had taken every book off the shelves on the 3 walls of bookcases and dusted them one by one and put them back. She had thought, more than once, that it was strange that the 4th wall of the back parlor, the one that should have run flush along the kitchen, was paneled in plain dark wood instead of also being bookshelves. Strange, but not the strangest thing in a house full of strange things. She had moved on. Now, with the key in her pocket and the flashlight in her hand, she stood in front of that wall and looked at it the way you look at a face that is hiding something. The paneling was made of long vertical boards of dark walnut, joined edge to edge, the seams almost invisible. But at about waist height, in the 3rd panel from the left, there was a small dark medallion, no bigger than the cap of a soda bottle, carved into the wood. A circle around a letter. The letter was M. She had walked past it 100 times. She pressed it with her thumb. It clicked. A panel the size of a paperback book slid sideways in the wood, smooth, on some kind of well-oiled track that had not failed in 100 years. Behind the panel was a brass keyhole shaped like a small, careful oval, exactly the shape of the bow of the key in her pocket. Rachel's heart did something it had not done in 2 years. It went quiet. She glanced back at the doorway of the parlor. Lily was still asleep in the other room, the gentle sound of her breathing audible through the open door. She drew the key from her pocket. Her hand was shaking, just a little. She steadied it against the wood, slid the key into the slot, and turned it. The lock made the sound of an old, exquisite mechanism waking up. A long, deep tumble. A click, another click, a third. And then, with a small sigh that was almost a breath, a section of the paneling, 6 feet tall and 3 feet wide, swung inward on hinges Rachel could not see. A wave of cold, dry, dust-quiet air rolled out into the parlor. Beyond the opening was a darkness so complete that her flashlight, when she lifted it, seemed to die at the threshold. The beam crept forward a foot, 2, and caught the edge of something. A step. Stone. Worn at the center as though by long use. Stairs. Going down. Rachel stood in the dark mouth of the doorway with her daughter asleep one room behind her and the November wind moving against the kitchen window, and she felt, for the first time since Tom had left and the lights had gone out and the eviction notice had been taped to her door, that her life had just stopped happening to her and started, very quietly, happening for her instead. She lifted the flashlight and put one foot on the first stone step. The stone steps were cold. Rachel counted them as she went down, the flashlight beam jumping ahead of her in a tight white cone, the cold, dry air rising against her face like the breath of something that had been holding very still for a long time. 11 steps. 12. The wall on her left was old fieldstone, mortared in a way she did not recognize, the kind of work done by hand 100 years ago by a man who had grown up doing it. The wall on her right was the same. The steps had been worn at the center by feet, not by many feet, but by the same feet over and over, the way the steps of a confessional get worn by one priest in a small parish. At step 17, the stairs leveled off into a short stone passage, maybe 6 feet long, ending at a door. Not a paneled door this time. A door of dark green painted iron, banded with brass strapping that had aged to almost the same color as the iron itself. There was a brass handle in the shape of a leaf, and beneath the handle, a small brass plate. On the plate, 2 words had been carved with the same hand that had cut her name into the key. For my daughter. Rachel stared at it for a long time. The handle was not locked. She turned it. The door opened inward with a slow exhale, the way a heavy thing opens when the hinges have been oiled by someone who cared. The flashlight beam went forward into the room. She felt for a switch beside the doorframe with her free hand, not really expecting one, and her fingers found a brass toggle the size of her thumb. She pressed it. Light came up. Not bright. The kind of weak honey-colored light old tungsten bulbs make when they have been wired by a man in 1929 and only turned on a dozen times since. 6 bulbs in 2 rows along the ceiling, hooded in green enamel shades. The light bloomed across the room slowly, the way a photograph develops in a tray. The room was about 14 feet wide and maybe 22 feet long. The walls were dressed stone, painted a soft cream that had gone yellow at the edges. The floor was tile, a deep red unglazed stone in 12-inch squares, laid by someone who had taken his time. In the center of the floor lay a single rug, a small one, no bigger than a bath towel, but the colors in it were so deep, even under the weak light, that Rachel knew without knowing how she knew that the rug was not a small rug. It was a small old rug. Persian. Some shade of garnet she had only ever seen in books. Along the long wall to her right stood 2 oak display cabinets, glass-fronted, taller than she was. The cabinets had the look of museum cases from the period when museums still trusted you. Inside the first cabinet, 3 shelves of mechanical figures stared back at her. A clown in a white satin costume, seated at a tiny desk, a quill in his porcelain hand. A woman in a green silk dress holding a mandolin, her bisque face tilted as if listening for a note she had just decided to play. A monkey in a red velvet jacket holding a flute. A gentleman in a velvet smoking jacket with a cigar in one hand. The cigar a real cigar, 100 years old, fragile as ash. For figures. 6. 8. She lost count at the end of the second shelf. The second cabinet held music boxes. Cylinder boxes with comb pin movements. The cylinders themselves visible through cutaway brass plates, the combs gleaming faintly. The largest of them stood almost 3 feet wide. The smallest, on the top shelf, was no bigger than a deck of cards. Against the long wall to her left, beneath the lights, stood a single long oak table. On the table, a flat tray covered in dark blue velvet, and on the velvet, in 3 tidy rows, 28 pocket watches. 28. Rachel walked toward the table slowly. The pocket watches were arranged the way good jewelers arrange watches on a tray they will sell to someone they will never see again. By size, by era, by the color of the case. Some were silver, the silver gone dark with age. Some were rose gold, soft as the inside of a peach. Some had cases enameled in deep blue or green, with tiny diamonds set around the edges. One in the bottom row was open, faced upward, the dial a black field with twin moons painted in silver. The hands stopped at 2:15. She did not pick up any of them. Behind the table, against the back wall of the chamber, stood a freestanding safe. About 4 feet tall, painted black, with a maker's name in gold leaf across the door. Mosseler. Mosseler Safe Company, Hamilton, Ohio. The dial of the combination lock was a brass medallion the size of a dinner plate. The safe was the only object in the room that looked, somehow, like a stranger to the rest. The watches and the music boxes and the automatons had a kind of quiet elegance, like guests at a small dinner party. The safe was the bouncer at the door. To the right of the safe, a roll-top desk. The top was rolled down. On its closed surface lay 3 things, set out neatly in a row, the way a museum curator lays out objects for a visitor. A leather-bound ledger, brown, the size of a textbook. A bundle of letters tied with a faded ribbon that had once been read, and a single sheet of paper, folded once, on top of the bundle. The paper had her name on it, Rachel Mercer, written in a thin, careful, very old handwriting that had to belong to a woman who had died 3 months earlier and who had, somehow, written Rachel's name knowing it would be the first thing Rachel saw when she found this room. Rachel sat down on the small leather chair in front of the desk and unfolded the paper because her knees would no longer hold her up. To Rachel, you are reading this because the key found you, and you found the door. You have done what I could not do, which is the simplest and hardest thing in the world. You came home. What is in this room is a small part of what my father, Cornelius Mercer, brought back to Westborough in the spring of 1929. It is the part he was able to save. The rest, the depositor's money, the savings of the people whose names you will hear cursed in this town, was already gone by the time my father knew it was gone. I have spent my life trying to make the world understand this, and I have failed. I leave the proof to you. The ledger on this desk is the bank's true ledger for the years 1927, 1928, and 1929. The letters beside it are my father's. They will tell you what happened. Read them in order. Believe them or don't, but read them. The watches and the small automata in the cabinets were my father's fathers and my father's father's fathers. My family came from Geneva in 1862. We made things that moved. We were good at it. Whatever you do with what is in this room, please do not let what we made be broken or scattered. They belong together. They have belonged together for a very long time. The safe combination is your birthday, Rachel, the day you were born, in the order month, day, year, 2 digits at a time. I asked for that piece of information through the lawyer when you were born. I never told you why. I am telling you now. You are not alone. Edith next door knows what I knew. The lawyer knows what I told him to know. Beyond that, the secret of this room has lived between me and the ghosts of my family for 82 years. I am sorry for the weight of it. I am not sorry that it is yours. Beatrice. Rachel did not realize she was crying until the paper in her hand was speckled with her own tears. She set the letter back on the desk very carefully, as if it were a butterfly that might still fly away, and she stood up and she walked the length of the room once, very slowly, looking at each thing in it, not touching anything yet, the way you walk into a church when no one else is there. 8 Mercer generations had stood in this room. Hers was the 9th. The flashlight in her hand was still on. She turned it off and slid it into her back pocket. The honey-colored light of the bulbs was enough. Somewhere overhead, very faint, the floorboards of the back parlor creaked. Rachel looked up. The ceiling of the chamber was, she realized now, the floor of the back parlor. The chamber was tucked beneath the kitchen and the back parlor both, dug into the side of the same hill the rest of the basement was dug into, but sealed off from it by a stone wall and a paneled door. Whoever had built it to last and to wait. She climbed the stairs back up. She came out into the back parlor where her daughter was still asleep on the rug, one arm flung over her face, the little square of dark blue velvet still in her hand. Rachel stood in the doorway between the parlor and the secret room for a long minute. Then she pushed the paneled door closed. The lock did not engage without the key, but the panel sat snug against the frame and would not open without a hard pull. She slid the small carved medallion back across its track. The wall, again, was a wall. Rachel knelt down by her daughter and picked her up. Lily, in her sleep, hooked an arm around her mother's neck the way she had since she was a baby. Rachel carried her upstairs and put her in her bed and pulled the quilt up to her chin and sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, watching her daughter sleep in the pale circle of the bedside lamp. She did not sleep that night. She sat on the bed beside Lily until the dawn came thin and gray through the maple branches outside the window, and then she went downstairs and put on coffee and stood at the kitchen window holding the warm cup with both hands and watching the field of dead goldenrod go from gray to gold as the sun cleared the eastern ridge. When she had finished the coffee, she walked the quarter-mile up Bellweather Road, in the cold, with her coat unzipped because she had not noticed that it was cold, and she knocked on Edith Patterson's front door. Edith answered the door in a flannel robe with a coffee cup in her own hand. She looked at Rachel's face for a long moment. Then she stepped back from the door and said, "Come in. I have been waiting for this morning for 30 years." Edith Patterson's kitchen was warm and yellow. There was a black cat asleep on a chair. There was a calendar on the wall from the Westborough Volunteer Fire Department. The wall clock ticked in a slow, patient rhythm. Rachel sat at the table and Edith poured her another cup of coffee and added a splash of cream without asking, and then sat down across from her with her hands folded. "You found it," Edith said. It was not a question. "I found it. Have you read the letters yet?" "No. I only just opened the door. Last night. You should read them today, before you do anything else." "I will." "Edith." "Yes. Did you know what was down there?" "I knew there was a room. I knew we spent time in it." She told me a few things in the last year, when she knew she did not have much time. She did not show it to me. She did not describe the contents. She said it was her father's room, and that she had never moved anything in it that had been in it when he died, and that she had kept it sealed for as long as she had kept it sealed because she was waiting for someone who could carry it the way it needed to be carried. She said that person was you. "Why me?" "Because you were the last one left, child. There is no other Mercer alive in the line that came down from Cornelius. Your grandfather had no other surviving children but your father, and your father had no other surviving children but you and Diane. And Diane, in BEA's judgment, did not have the temperament." He said that about a lot of people. She did not, by the way, say it about me. She said I did not have the right. "Why not?" "Because," Edith said, with a faint smile, "I am not a Mercer. The room belongs to your family. It always has." Bea was very particular about that. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. Rachel held the coffee cup with both hands. Edith, what is in that room? What is actually in there? Edith Patterson reached across the table and put her hand over Rachel's hand. I don't know exactly what is in there, she said, but I will tell you what Bea told me about her father, in the order she told it to me, because I think you are about to read it for yourself in his own words, and I want you to know it from a friend first. Rachel nodded. Cornelius Mercer, Edith said, was born in this house in 1881. He was the only son of Heinrich Mercer, who came to this country from Geneva in 1862 with 2 trunks. One was full of watchmaker's tools. The other was full of pieces, watches, music boxes, small automata, that his own father and grandfather had made or collected over 4 generations. Heinrich was a watchmaker. He set up a shop in Pittsburgh first, then moved out here in 1873 because he wanted land and quiet. He kept his tools. He kept his collection. He raised 1 son. Cornelius did not go into watchmaking. Cornelius went into banking. Edith took a sip of her coffee. By 1920, Cornelius was the president of the Westborough Citizens Bank. He had inherited his father's collection in 1909 when Heinrich died. He kept it in this house. He kept it private. He was proud of it, and he did not display it. That, you have to understand, was a Mercer thing. They had money. They did not show it. The town knew the family had money. The town did not know how much. In 1927, Cornelius hired a vice president named Edwin Hollister. Edith said the name carefully. You will hear that name a great deal in the days to come, she said. The Hollisters are a family in this town. They were a family in this town in 1927, and they are a family in this town now. The current Edwin Hollister, the third one, is the president of the town council. He is a lawyer. He owns the building the bank is in. He sits on the school board. He is going to find out, very quickly, that you found that room. Rachel said, what did Hollister do? What he did, Edith said, was steal from the bank for 20 months without being caught. He had a system. He used shell accounts. He used loans he wrote himself in names that did not exist, and then wrote off as bad debt at the end of the year. He moved money out of the depositors' accounts into a private trust set up in Pittsburgh in his cousin's name, who was at that time the state banking commissioner. By February of 1929, he had emptied the bank. Cornelius found out in March. There was a small audit, an interior audit, that Cornelius ran himself when he could not sleep one night and went into the office at 3 in the morning. He found the discrepancies. He went home. He spent 2 weeks tracing them. He gathered enough evidence to bring to the federal authorities. He told my husband's grandfather about it, who was at that time a bookkeeper at the bank. My husband's grandfather is the reason any of this is known at all. He kept his own records of what Cornelius found. Then what? Then Edwin Hollister, who must have realized he was being investigated, moved first. He went to his cousin, the banking commissioner. He told the commissioner Cornelius was the embezzler. He had documents he had forged. He had witnesses he had paid. On a Friday afternoon in April of 1929, a state inspector came to the bank with 2 officers and a warrant for Cornelius's arrest. Cornelius was not at the bank that afternoon. He was at home, with Bea and her mother. He was warned, by phone, by my husband's grandfather, with about 10 minutes to spare. So he ran. He did not run, Edith said. He did not, in the strict sense, run. He took his family's private possessions, the watches, the music boxes, the automata, his father's old gold, the family papers, and he locked them in the room he had been building, secretly, in the basement of this house for the last 6 months. He had built it because he was afraid of exactly what was happening. He had built it because he was afraid Hollister's people would come to the house and claim that his family's private wealth was the missing bank money, which is what they did. They came to this house, on Saturday, with the sheriff. They searched it. They found nothing but a man and his wife and his 8-year-old daughter and a kitchen full of empty cabinets where the silver had been. He had even hidden the silver. Edith laughed, a soft, tired laugh. He had even hidden the silver, she said again. Anyway, he went to Pittsburgh on Monday. He turned himself in. He spent 6 months awaiting trial. The trial was a farce. The state banking commissioner was Hollister's cousin. The judge was a Hollister cousin too. The jury was composed of men whose savings had been wiped out by the bank failure, and they had been told for 6 months who to blame. Cornelius Mercer was convicted of embezzlement. He was sentenced to 8 years. He served 8 months because his heart gave out in August of 1930. He came home on a medical release, and he died in the front parlor of this house in March of 1931. Beatrice was 10 years old. She was in the room when he died. He had been telling her, off and on for 2 years, exactly what had really happened. He gave her the key to the room on his deathbed. He told her that she was the keeper now. She was 10. Rachel did not speak. She could not. Her throat would not move. He spent her whole life on it, Edith said softly. Twice she tried to bring it out. Once in 1955, with a Pittsburgh lawyer who took her money and then dropped the case after he got a visit from someone he would not name. Once in 1978, with a young reporter from the Patriot News in Harrisburg, who lost his job 2 weeks after he interviewed her. She concluded, somewhere in the 80s, that she was going to die before she could finish it. She decided then that she would protect the room until the right person came along. She would not sell. She would not move. She would not, as long as she lived, allow the Hollisters or anyone else to set foot in that house. And she did not. She was buried out of this house. The undertaker came and took her out the front door, and that was the only time, in 61 years, that the door opened to a stranger. Edith took a long breath. You are the right person, she said. She told me so. I will say also that I think she was right. Rachel sat at the table for a long time. Edith, she said finally, the Hollisters are still here. Yes. And Edwin Hollister III runs the town. Yes. What is he going to do when he finds out? Edith Patterson looked at her over the rim of her coffee cup and said, very calmly, he is going to try to bury it again. Rachel called Howard Howell from Edith's kitchen. He was at the office at 8 in the morning, which Rachel had assumed he would be, because he was the kind of man who had been at his office at 8 in the morning every business day for 40 years. He picked up on the second ring. When she told him she had found the room, his line went silent for a full half-minute. She could hear him breathing. Ms. Mercer, he said finally, I will be at your house in 2 hours. Do not let anyone else into the room until I am there. Do not photograph anything yet. Do not call anyone else. Especially not anyone in this town. She did not call anyone else. She walked back down Bellweather Road in the cold, with the sun higher now, and she let herself into her own kitchen and sat at the table and looked at the back parlor doorway and waited. Howard Howell arrived at 5 minutes past 10 in a 1998 Mercedes the color of slate, a thin man in his late 70s in a brown wool overcoat, carrying a briefcase that looked older than he was. Lily was at school. The house was very quiet. Rachel let him in. She did not offer him coffee. She walked him through the back parlor to the wall and pressed the medallion, and the panel slid open, and she put the key in the lock and the door swung inward, and Howard Howell, who had been Beatrice Mercer's lawyer for 34 years, stood at the top of the stone steps and looked down into the honey-colored light of the room he had never seen and never expected to see. He set down his briefcase. He took off his glasses and put them in his coat pocket. He went down the steps very slowly, holding the wall. When he reached the bottom, he stood in the middle of the chamber, and he turned in a slow, careful circle, and at the end of the circle he sat down in the small leather chair in front of the desk, because his legs would no longer hold him up either. He sat there for a long time without speaking. Then he opened his briefcase and took out a yellow legal pad and a fountain pen. We have, he said, a great deal to do. He read the letters first. All of them. Rachel sat in the second chair Edith had brought down from the kitchen and watched him read. He read for 2 hours, in silence, his lips moving slightly with each line. Once, he made a small sound, somewhere between a cough and a sob, and he took a handkerchief out of his pocket and pressed it briefly to his eyes. Then he kept reading. When he finished the last letter, he set them down very carefully on the desk, and he turned to Rachel. Ms. Mercer, he said, your great-great-grandfather was an honest man. I am beginning to understand that. What is in these letters, and what is in the ledger beside them, constitutes a substantial evidentiary basis for a federal claim of fraud against the estate of Edwin Hollister I, and through him, against the holdings of his descendants. The original deeds in this room, which I have not yet examined, but which be told me existed, may also constitute the basis for a quiet title action regarding several pieces of property in this county that have been in Hollister hands since 1932 and that may, in fact, have never legally left Mercer ownership. Howard. Yes. What does that mean? In English. It means, Howard Howell said, that the truth about your family is in this room. And it means that the Hollister family, several members of which still live in this town and who currently own, by my rough estimate, a quarter of the commercial real estate in Westborough, may be required to give some of it back. How much? I cannot say without an appraisal. But his thin face did something complicated. A great deal, he said. We are speaking, Ms. Mercer, of a great deal. He stood. He crossed to the velvet tray of pocket watches on the long table. He bent over them with his hands clasped behind his back, the careful posture of a man who has not touched a thing in 70 years he was not certain he had permission to touch. He looked at the watches for 10 minutes without saying anything. Then he straightened and said, "This is a Patek Philippe." "Yes. Pocket watch. Very early. The mid-1880s, I would guess. Repeater movement. The case is enameled. The diamonds in the bezel are not the largest part of the value, but they are not nothing. Yes. This other one, 2 over, in the rose gold case. I think that is a brigade. I don't know what that means." He turned to look at her. "It means, Ms. Mercer, that we need an expert who is not me. We need someone who knows horology, someone who knows mechanical art, someone who knows 19th century books, and who can authenticate the rest of what is in this room. There is a firm I have used before, out of Philadelphia. I will call them today. They will be discreet. The man who runs their European objects department is named Andrew Pell. Pell is not a man who talks. When can he come? I will ask him for tomorrow. Tomorrow is too fast. Tomorrow, Howard Howell said, is too slow. But it is the soonest I can manage." Andrew Pell drove up from Philadelphia the next morning in a station wagon that did not look like the station wagon of a man who appraised rare watches. He was in his early 60s, soft-bellied, balding, with the careful, watery eyes of a man who had been examining small things for 40 years. He brought with him a leather case of jeweler's loupes, a portable digital scale, a UV lamp, a notebook, and his nephew, who was 26 and serving as his assistant. He shook Rachel's hand. He looked her in the eye for exactly the right amount of time. He said, "Howard tells me there is something here worth my coming. I do not, Ms. Mercer, drive to small towns in Pennsylvania for nothing." She took him down the steps. When the door swung open and the honey-colored light fell across the room, Andrew Pell stood in the doorway and did the thing that all the men did when they entered the room for the first time. He stopped. He stood very still. His mouth did something that was not quite a smile. "Oh," he said softly. "Oh my." He spent 11 hours in the chamber. He worked with the slow, patient method of a man who had taught himself, over decades, to be careful about being excited. He took each pocket watch off the velvet tray one at a time, weighed it, examined the case under the loupe, opened the back with a tool from his case, examined the movement, photographed it from 3 angles, recorded the serial number where he could find one, and laid it back down on the velvet in exactly the same orientation. His nephew kept the running list on a laptop. At lunchtime, Rachel brought them sandwiches from upstairs, ham and cheese on white bread, the cheapest sandwich she could make, and Andrew Pell thanked her as if she had brought him filet mignon, and then went back to work without eating until 5 in the afternoon, when he ate the sandwich standing at the long table without looking up. By 6 o'clock he had finished the watches. He moved to the automatons. He worked through them in the cabinets without removing them, only opening the glass doors. He photographed each figure. He examined the maker's marks on the bases where there were marks. He whispered names under his breath. Vichy, Rillet et de Camps, Lambert, Falliboys. He used the words like a man saying the names of old friends he had not expected to see at the funeral. At 9 in the evening, he sat down in the leather chair Howard had used the day before. His nephew closed the laptop. Andrew Pell took off his loupe and rubbed his eyes. "Ms. Mercer," he said. "Yes. I am going to give you a preliminary estimate." "All right." He took a slow breath. "The watches on the table are worth, in my conservative estimate, $26 million. The most valuable single piece is the Patek Philippe minute repeater in the bottom row, which I would put it between $4 and $5 million at auction. The brigade attacked in rose gold, the third from the left in the top row, is around $3 million. There are 9 other pieces I would individually estimate above $1 million. $26 million, Andrew Pell said again. Conservatively. Rachel did not say anything. The automatons, he continued, are a more specialized market, but they are very rare and they are in extraordinary condition. The Vichy smoker is worth, by itself, around $400,000. The Lambert Pierrot writing is approximately the same. There are 15 significant pieces in the 2 cabinets and another 7 minor pieces, by which I mean pieces under $100,000 each. I would estimate the cabinet contents, together with the music boxes which I have not yet fully examined, but which appear to include at least 2 important Nicole Frere's cylinder boxes, at approximately $14 million. Possibly more after a proper inspection. 14. Yes. He looked down at the legal pad on his knee. I have not opened the safe. No. I have not examined the books. I haven't either. I have not examined the rugs. I have not examined the paintings against the wall, of which I noticed when I came in there are 3. One of those, on the second look, looks to me like it might be a Franz Hall school piece. I am not yet committed on that point. He looked up. Ms. Mercer. Yes. Excluding the safe, the books, the rugs, the paintings, the furniture, and any documents that may have separate value, what is in this room is, in my professional opinion, worth at least $40 million. With the safe and the rest, I would not be surprised if the total figure approaches $140 million. Possibly higher. Rachel reached for the back of the chair behind her because her hand needed to be on something solid. $140 million. I will repeat. That is a preliminary figure. She sat down on the chair. Her ears were ringing. $140 million. Howard Howell, who had been sitting in the corner of the chamber on a folding chair for most of the day, taking notes in his own small black notebook, did not look surprised. He looked very tired. He set the notebook down on his knee and he said, with the slow precision of a man who knew exactly how to say a thing once and only once, Ms. Mercer, this is the moment when we have to decide who knows what we have found, and who finds out later, and from whom. From this moment on, we are managing information. Do you understand? She nodded. You will need to call your sister, Howard said. I will. You will not call your ex-husband. I will not. You will not call anyone from your old job. I won't. I will tomorrow morning notify the federal authorities, in writing, of the existence of the ledger and the letters. I will move slowly. I will not file any civil claim yet. I will not contact the Hollister family. The Hollister family will find out within 72 hours regardless. This town does not keep secrets. Mr. Pell will leave tonight with photographs and provisional documentation, and he will take with him the most portable and most valuable single pieces, in a locked case, to be held in his firm's vault in Philadelphia under the standard provisions. We will leave the larger pieces here for the moment. I will arrange for a private security service to begin overnight monitoring by tomorrow night. Are you saying I am in danger? I am saying, Howard Howell said carefully, that you are now in possession of objects worth a great deal of money, and you have been so for less than 24 hours, and you live alone in a remote house with a 7-year-old child. I am not saying you are in danger from the Hollisters. I am saying I would rather not find out. She looked at him. Howard. Yes. Beatrice spent 61 years alone in this house with this room beneath her, and she did not arrange for a private security service. How was she safe? Howard Howell smiled, just a little. It was the kind of smile a kind man wears when he answers a hard question honestly. Because, he said, no one knew the room existed. The safe they had left until the end of the day. Andrew Pell had said he wanted to see the rest of the room first, because the safe was the variable he could not estimate without opening it, and because the combination, written on a small slip of paper in Beatrice's letter, was a fact known to no one but Rachel and the dead woman who had written it. She knelt in front of the heavy black mausoleum in the corner with Howard Howell on one side and Andrew Pell on the other and Edith Patterson watching from the foot of the stone stairs. Her birthday, month, day, year, 2 digits at a time. She turned the brass dial slowly, the way Howard had told her, 3 turns right to the first number, 2 turns left past it to the second, 1 turn right to the third. The mechanism inside the safe gave a faint click on each number, the way an old clock gives the small clean tick of a healthy escapement. When she reached the last number, the safe door did not open on its own. There was a lever set into the door frame, polished brass, the size of her thumb. She pushed it down. The safe opened with the slow, soft sigh of something that had not been opened in a very long time. Inside, in 3 shelves separated by sheets of green felt, sat the rest of Cornelius Mercer's life. The top shelf held coins, 2 long wooden trays of them, set side by side. Gold sovereigns in the left tray, by Andrew Pell's quick estimate 840 pieces, all dated between 1860 and 1925, in uncirculated or near uncirculated condition. American Gold Eagles in the right tray, 312 pieces, the same vintage range. Pell looked at them and said, without lifting any out, conservatively $2 million by weight alone, perhaps 3 with collector's premiums on the rarer dates. The middle shelf held bonds and stock certificates. Bearer bonds in a tall ribbon-tied stack, issued by the United States Treasury in the 1920s, face value $1,000 each, somewhere over 100 of them. An unresolved question of whether bearer bonds of that vintage were still redeemable, but, as Howard Howell said quietly to himself, looking at them, that was a question for tax lawyers, not appraisers. Below the bonds, in a separate bundle, the original engraved share certificates. 600 shares of Singer Manufacturing. 800 shares of an outfit called Standard Oil of New Jersey, issued in 1911 before the antitrust split, which Pell whistled at. 1,200 shares of a small Pennsylvania coal company that had been acquired by a larger one in 1947, the rights of which had passed through 3 corporate parents, but, as far as Howard Howell could tell at first reading, had never been formally extinguished. The bottom shelf held papers. A bundle of deeds, tied in black string. A bound legal portfolio with the words Mercer Holdings on the cover. A second portfolio marked the mill. A small, leather-bound book that turned out, when Rachel opened it, to be Cornelius Mercer's own personal accounting of every dollar he had moved into the safe between November of 1928 and April of 1929, with the source of each one and a signed attestation, witnessed by Heinrich's former clerk in Pittsburgh, that none of the funds had ever passed through the Westborough Citizens Bank. Howard Howell looked at that book the longest of any of them. When he had finished, he closed it and set it carefully on top of the bond bundle. He looked up at Rachel. Your great-great-grandfather, he said, was not just an honest man. He was a meticulous one. There is in this book the answer to every question the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania ever asked of him. He paused. 97 years too late. Better than never, Edith Patterson said quietly from the steps. That night, after Andrew Pell had loaded his 2 locked cases into the back of his station wagon and pulled away down the long drive, after Howard had driven back to his office to begin the work of drafting letters to the federal authorities and the state attorney general, after Edith had come and sat in the kitchen with Rachel for 2 more hours, Rachel went back down into the chamber alone. She sat in the leather chair at the desk, and she untied the faded red ribbon around the bundle of letters, and she began to read. The first one was dated March 14th, 1929. My dear Beatrice, you are 8 years old today. I have written you a letter on each of your birthdays since you were born, and I have kept all of them in this drawer, and one day you will read them, and they will be a kind of life of you written by the man who loves you most. Today is different. Today I have to write you not just the letter of your birthday, but a letter that, if I am right about what is happening, may be the most important thing I ever write. I hope I am wrong. I do not think I am. There is a man at the bank named Edwin Hollister. He came to us 2 years ago. I hired him on the recommendation of his cousin, who is a man of position in the state. I have for some weeks now believed that Edwin Hollister has been taking money from the bank. Last night I sat in my office for 6 hours, and I am no longer believing it. I now know it. The amount is very large. The depositors of this bank, our neighbors, the men and women whose savings my father pledged to my keeping and whose savings I pledged to my own, have been robbed. They do not yet know it. I do not yet know what to do. The second letter was dated 3 days later. I have spoken to Mr. Hollister. I went to him plainly, because I am not a man trained to be otherwise. I had hoped he would deny it, and I would find that I had been wrong. He did not deny it. He smiled at me. He said that I had 2 choices. The first was to be a partner. The second was to be the man the state inspectors found responsible. He said I had a wife and a daughter. He said it the way a man says weather. I left his office. I came home. I have not slept. The third letter was a week later. I have made my decision. I will not be a partner. I will gather what proof I can. I will go to Pittsburgh on the 5th of next month, to the federal building, and I will hand what I have to the men who will know what to do with it. I have spoken to one man in this town I trust completely, a clerk named Walter Patterson, who has agreed to keep copies of certain papers in case any harm comes to me. He is a good man. He cried when I asked him. He has a wife and 3 small children. He will, if I do not survive this, be one of the few in this town who knows the truth. Rachel had to set the letter down. She knew the name Walter Patterson. He was Edith's husband's grandfather. He was the man Edith had been describing, very quietly, in her kitchen that morning. The clerk who had kept his own records. The reason any of this is known at all. She read the next letter through tears. It was dated April 12th, the day Cornelius had been arrested. My dear Beatrice, I am writing this from the parlor downstairs. I have 1 hour. Walter has just telephoned. The state inspector is on his way with a warrant. He will arrest me at the bank. I will not be at the bank. I will be at home. I will be here, with you, with your mother, until they come for me here, which they will, sometime tomorrow, because I do not intend to give them the dignity of a public arrest. I have moved what I can move. The rest of what is precious to our family is already where you and your mother's mother and I have, together and apart, prepared a place for it. I have spoken to your mother. She is brave. She has been brave for many years. She will continue to be brave. She and I have agreed on certain things. You are too young to be told them now. When you are old enough, she will tell you. If she cannot, I will. If we both cannot, then someone we both trust will, and that person, more likely than not, will be the lawyer in town, who is a young man but a good one. His name is Henry Howell. Rachel made a small sound. Henry Howell was Howard Howell's father. The last letter in the bundle was dated August 11th, 1930, 3 weeks before Cornelius's death. The handwriting was different now, thinner, less steady, the hand of a man whose heart was failing. My beautiful girl, they have let me come home. The men at the prison say it is to recover. I think it is to die. I am not afraid. I have been afraid every day since the spring of last year. I am tired of being afraid. When I am gone, the key to the room in the basement will be on a string around your neck. I have asked your mother to put it there while I am being buried. The room is yours now. I have asked one thing of you, and I will ask it again here so that it is written, so that you cannot forget. The room is to remain closed. The truth is to remain in the room. Until what, Father? He had answered her in the last paragraph of the letter, as if he had heard the question across 95 years. Until there is a Mercer who can stand. I do not think that will be you. I do not think it will be your son if you have one. I think it will be a long time. The Hollisters are deep in this town now. They have made themselves the town. They will go on making themselves the town for many years after I am dead. You must wait, beautiful girl. You must teach your children to wait. The room is patient. We are patient. Time is on our side. Truth, in the end, walks slower than money, but it walks longer. I love you. I have loved you every day of your life. I will be loving you, in some form, every day of yours. Your father, Cornelius. Rachel sat in the chair in the chamber with the letter in her hands and the honey-colored light on the stones and the long quiet of 140 years pressing down on her, and she understood that what was in this room was not, in any meaningful sense, money. The money was an accident of the way the world kept score. What was in this room was a man trying to reach his daughter through 95 years of silence, and his daughter trying to reach a great-great-niece she had only met twice. And somewhere at the end of that long pass of hands, Rachel was sitting alone at the desk holding the final receipt. She did not call her sister that night. She had said she would. She let the lie stand. She climbed the stone stairs and closed the chamber and slid the panel and went upstairs and stood for a long time outside Lily's bedroom door. In the morning, Rachel made pancakes. There was syrup this time. She had bought it at the IGA on Thursday. Lily came down in her unicorn pajamas and climbed up on the chair at the kitchen table and watched her mother flip pancakes onto a plate. Lily. Yeah, Mama. You know that key you found? Yeah. Do you remember what I said when you found it? You said let's find out where the door is. We found the door. Lily put her fork down. There's a room, Rachel said. Under the back parlor. A secret room. Great-Aunt Beatrice's father made it a long time ago, and Great-Aunt Beatrice kept it secret for her whole life, and now that she's gone the room is ours. Lily considered this. What's in it? Things, Rachel said. Old things. Beautiful things. Letters from a man who lived in this house 100 years ago. Some watches. Some music boxes. Some small mechanical toys that move. He made some of them himself, or his father did. Are they mine? Are they yours? The mechanical toys. Rachel sat down across from her daughter. Some of them might be, she said. Some of them are very fragile and they are too valuable to play with. So a man is going to come from Philadelphia next week and very carefully take them away to be looked after. But there are some that I think Great-Aunt Beatrice would want you to know about. Maybe to look at. With me, when we are very careful. Lily nodded slowly. Is it good news, Mama, that the room is there? Rachel looked at her daughter. Lily, in her unicorn pajamas, holding her fork above the pancake she had not yet eaten, with maple syrup on her chin and her dark eyes serious and patient, the way they had been serious and patient at the front door in Bloomfield when the eviction notice had been taped to it. A child who had learned, too young, to read her mother's face for the answer before her mother gave it. Yes, Rachel said. Yes, baby. It is good news. The phone on the kitchen counter buzzed. Rachel did not look at it. She watched her daughter eat pancakes for the next 4 minutes. Then she picked up the phone. She had told Diane she would call. She had not called. She dialed her sister now, in the cold morning light, while Lily ate the last of her pancakes at the table beside her. Diane picked up on the second ring. Her voice was tight in the way it always was on a weekday morning before her second coffee. Rach, what's wrong? Nothing's wrong. You sound strange. I know. A pause. Then Diane, more alert, asked, what is it? I found something. In the house. In the house. There was a longer pause this time. Tell me, Diane said. Her voice was different now. It was the voice of a woman who had had time to think about her sister's situation since the last time they had spoken and who had concluded, in the quiet hours of more than one night in her own house, that perhaps she had not been as kind to her sister as her sister had deserved. Rachel told her. She told her about the floorboard and the key and the door and the stairs and the room. She told her about the watches and the music boxes and the safe. She told her about the letters and the ledger and Cornelius and Edwin Hollister and the framing in 1929. She told her about Andrew Pell. She told her the number. When Rachel said the number, Diane did not speak for a long time. $140 million, Diane said finally. As if the words were a foreign language she was practicing. That's the preliminary estimate. Rach. Diane. I am so sorry. For what? For not believing you. For the kitchen island. For Mark. For the couch. You were trying to be a sister. I was being a coward. You were being a sister. Diane was crying now. Rachel could hear it through the phone. Rachel did not cry. She had stopped crying over paperwork 2 years ago, and $140 million, somehow, felt the same as paperwork now. It was just numbers on a different page. Real life, the part Rachel knew how to live, was still the kitchen and the daughter upstairs and the unpaid bill at the heating oil company and the long road that went up to the house. Diane. Yes. I need you here. As soon as you can. With your overnight bag. When? Tomorrow. I will be there tomorrow. She hung up. Rachel sat alone in the kitchen for a while. Lily had finished her pancakes and gone upstairs to dress for school. Outside, the maples on the drive had let go of the last of their leaves, and the morning light through the kitchen window was thin and clean. Rachel made another pot of coffee. She got Lily on the school bus at 8:20. She drove herself into town for her shift at the Hollahawk because she had told Doris Bell she would be there, and she did not yet know how, or whether, to tell Doris Bell she was not going to be a waitress anymore. The shift was uneventful. Dale Harrow did not come in. The woman who had nodded at Rachel the week before came in and ordered coffee and a short stack and put a $5 bill in the tip cup, which was more than the meal had cost, and Rachel understood, with a small ache in her chest, that the word had not yet reached the Hollahawk, but that this woman knew something had happened. People in small towns always knew something had happened before they knew what. She got home at 3. Lily got home at 3:40. They did homework at the kitchen table. Rachel fed Lily macaroni and cheese for dinner. She put her to bed at 8. She went down into the chamber again, alone, and she sat in the leather chair and read 4 more of Cornelius's letters. She came up at 10. The phone rang at 10:15. The voice on the other end was male. Middle-aged. The kind of voice trained to be reasonable. Ms. Mercer. Yes. My name is Edwin Hollister. I am the president of the town council here in Westborough. I understand you are new to our community, and I want to extend, on behalf of the council, a very warm welcome. Rachel set her coffee cup down on the counter. Thank you. I also understand that you have been very busy in your great aunt's house this past week. Rachel did not answer. Mr. Hollister continued, in the same reasonable voice. There are some matters relating to your family's historical relationship with this town that have, I am told, recently come to your attention. We at the council, and certain other concerned families in town, would very much like to sit down with you in a friendly setting to discuss these matters before they become, shall we say, public-facing. I think you will find that there are several mutually beneficial avenues available to all parties. Rachel looked at the clock on her nightstand. 10:16 at night. Mr. Hollister. Yes. How did you get this number? There was a brief, polite silence. It is a small town, Ms. Mercer. I'll have my attorney call you back. She hung up. She sat in her bed with the phone in her hand and the dark wind moving against the maples outside her window, and she understood, with a clarity that arrived all at once, and that did not feel like fear, that the second part of her life had just begun, and that the second part of her life was going to be a war. For a long time after the call, Rachel did not move. She stood at the kitchen counter with the phone in her hand and the soft hum of the refrigerator in the dark room behind her and the wind moving slow against the porch outside. Then she set the phone down. She poured the rest of the coffee from the pot down the sink. She washed the cup. She went upstairs and stood at Lily's door for a minute, listening to her daughter breathe. Then she came back down and dialed Howard Howell. He picked up on the first ring. I had a feeling, he said. Edwin Hollister. The third. He just called me. What did he say? Friendly things. Threatening underneath. How did he get your number? I asked him that. He said it was a small town. Howard Howell made a small, dry sound that was not a laugh. I will be at your house at 7:30 in the morning, he said. Before that, I would like you to do 3 things. Lock all the doors and windows. Move the desk lamp from the back parlor to a spot where it can be seen from outside through the kitchen window. Leave it on overnight. And do not, under any circumstances, go down into the chamber again before I arrive. Why the lamp? So that anyone watching the house from the road sees a lit room, he said. Houses with one light on in a window the visitor cannot see into are houses where someone is awake and watching. It is an old trick. It still works. I'll do it. Get some sleep, Ms. Mercer. I won't. I know. Try anyway. She did the things he had asked. She did not sleep. She sat in the back parlor in Beatrice's wingback chair with a blanket around her shoulders and the lamp on the side table burning and a book in her lap that she did not read. The wind in the maples outside the window made the same sound it had been making for 140 years. At 3 in the morning, a car came down the long drive, slow, and stopped at the turnaround in front of the house, and sat there for 2 minutes with its lights off, and then turned around and drove back out. Rachel did not move. The next day, when she told Howard, he nodded once and did not look surprised. By 7:30, the house had 2 more people in it. Howard Howell with his briefcase and a thermos of coffee, and a man Rachel had not been told to expect, a younger man in his 40s with a shaved head and the relaxed shoulders of a person who had carried weight for a living. His name was Daniel Cross. He was, Howard explained, an off-duty state trooper who had agreed to spend his days on the front porch for the next 2 weeks. He had a cousin in the firm. The arrangement had been made. I do not want him in the house, Rachel said. Lily, he will not be in the house. He will be on the porch. He will read a book. He will introduce himself to anyone who comes up the drive as a friend of the family who happened to be visiting. If they say they are from the council or from a law firm, he will say that Ms. Mercer is not available, that they should call her attorney, and he will give them my card. They will go away. Will they? Howard Howell looked at her. Once or twice they may not. He will, in those cases, persuade them. He did not say how Daniel Cross would persuade them. He did not need to. Daniel Cross sat down in the wicker chair on the porch where Edith Patterson had been sitting on the first afternoon, and he poured himself a cup of coffee from the thermos he had brought, and he opened a paperback novel, and he did not look like a man you would want to argue with. Diane arrived at noon. She came in her station wagon with one overnight bag and a stricken expression that did not lift for the first hour she was in the house. She had cried for most of the drive from Greensburg. Her mascara was a faint gray smudge under her lower lashes that Rachel knew her sister had decided not to bother fixing in the rearview mirror, which, for Diane, was a kind of nakedness Rachel had not seen since their mother's funeral. She held Rachel for a long time at the door, not the half hug she usually gave, but the full long thing, with her chin on Rachel's shoulder and her arms tied around Rachel's back. When she pulled away, she said only, "I'm here. What do you need?" Lily showed her around the house. Diane sat with her at the kitchen table and let Lily explain, with 7-year-old gravity, where the kitchen was, where the wood stove was, why the front parlor had figurines named Penelope and Margaret and Steve, why the bed in Lily's room was old, why there was a wooden horse on the desk. Diane listened to all of it. She said the right things. She held her niece's hand when Lily reached for it. She did not, while Lily was in the room, mention the chamber. After Lily went out into the yard with Emma, who had come up from down the road, Diane turned to her sister. "Show me," she said. Rachel showed her. They went down the stone steps together. Diane did not say a word the whole way down. When the door opened into the honey-colored light of the chamber, Diane stood in the threshold and looked at the watches on the velvet tray and the automatons in their cabinets and the safe and the rugs and the desk and the bundle of letters tied with the faded red ribbon, and she sat down on the bottom step because her legs would no longer hold her up. "Rach," she said. "I know. Rach. I know, Diane. How long has it been here?" 100 years. 100 years. Yes. How long did Aunt Beatrice know? 82 years. $140 million, Diane said softly, not as a fact, but as a kind of recitation. A confirmation she was speaking out loud the number she had been speaking quietly to herself in the car for the last 4 hours. Approximately. We won't know exactly until everything is appraised. Rachel. Yes. I was a bad sister to you. You were a tired sister. I was a bad one. Diane. Yes. I'm going to need a good one for the next year. So can we agree that the bad one was last year, and that we move on? Diane laughed, just once, into her hands. Yes, she said. We can agree. They stayed in the chamber for an hour. Diane read the letter Beatrice had left for Rachel. She read 3 of Cornelius's letters. She did not read the rest. She said she would another time. When they came up the stairs, Rachel slid the panel closed and pressed the medallion. And they went into the kitchen and Diane started making sandwiches because that, Diane said, was what she could do. She could make sandwiches. The lawyers and the watches and the safes were beyond her competence, she said, but she could feed her sister and her niece and herself for a week, and she would. At 3 in the afternoon, the first lawyer arrived. He drove a black BMW down the long maple drive and parked it at the turnaround and got out smoothing his suit jacket. He was in his 50s. He had soft hair the color of brushed steel. He carried a leather portfolio. Daniel Cross stood up from the wicker chair on the porch and walked down the steps and met the man halfway across the yard, in the dead goldenrod, with the wind moving the man's coat against his legs. Rachel watched from the kitchen window. She could not hear what was said. Daniel Cross spoke first, briefly. The lawyer answered, more briefly. Daniel Cross said something else. The lawyer reached into his portfolio and produced a business card, which Daniel Cross took without looking at it. Then Daniel Cross handed the man one of Howard Howell's cards. The man read it. He nodded. He turned and walked back to his BMW. He drove away. Daniel Cross came back up the porch steps and sat down in the wicker chair and opened his paperback. Rachel went out onto the porch. He didn't come in, she said. No, ma'am. What did he want? He said he was a partner at a firm in Pittsburgh that represents a number of families in this town, and that his clients were hoping to discuss with you a matter of mutual interest. I told him you weren't available. He left me a card. I gave him Mr. Howell's card. He understood the situation. Rachel took the card. Stedman and Howell was not on it. 3 other names were. It was a long card. It said the firm had offices in Pittsburgh and Harrisburg and Philadelphia. The man's name was Jeffrey Stamp. I'll give this to Howard when he comes back. He'll be expecting it. Daniel Cross went back to his book. The second lawyer arrived 2 hours later. A woman this time. Younger. She got the same treatment. She left. Tom called the next morning. Rachel was making coffee. The kitchen was warm and quiet. Diane was upstairs with Lily, getting her ready for school. Daniel Cross was on the porch. The maple light through the kitchen window was the same maple light it had been for 140 November mornings. And Rachel had the strange thought that this was the day every Mercer woman in this house had been preparing for since 1929, and she was the one who had drawn the short straw to actually walk through it. The phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. Tom. She did not consider not answering. She had learned long ago that you do not refuse a fire by closing your eyes to it. Rach. Tom. I saw the news. There was no news yet. The story had not broken. The story would not break for another 3 days. But Tom had a brother who lived in Latrobe, whose girlfriend's cousin lived in Westborough. The news and the kind of life Tom lived ran on a different wire than the news and the kind of life everyone else lived. There's no news, she said. There's news. Mike's girl said you found something. I found nothing that concerns you. Rachel, come on. We were married for 9 years. I have a kid with you. I am, like it or not, part of this. You are not part of this. I have a right to. You don't have any rights. You haven't paid child support in 14 months. You haven't seen Lily since June. You don't get to be part of anything I do anymore. You walked out the door. The walking out of the door was the part where you stopped having rights. Rachel. Tom. I am driving down today. You are not driving down today. I'll be there by 3. I want to see my daughter. You don't get to use her like that. I am her father. You are not the part of her father that she needs right now. Goodbye, Tom. She hung up. She set the phone on the counter. Her hand was shaking, just a little. She closed her eyes for a moment. She opened them. She called Howard Howell. Tom is on his way, she said. Howard Howell made the sound men of his generation make when they hear of a problem they know exactly how to solve. I will have papers ready for him when he arrives, he said. The papers will explain to him in plain language what he stands to gain and what he stands to lose if he interferes with these proceedings. He stands, by the way, to lose far more than he stands to gain. He has not, as I am sure you are aware, paid you the child support he owes. The amount, with interest and penalties under Pennsylvania family law, is approximately $18,000. Yes, the judge in this county who handles such matters is a personal friend of mine. Rachel laughed, despite herself. Howard, I will be at your house at noon. Daniel will manage Mr. Mercer's arrival. I will be there to manage the conversation. You're not a divorce lawyer. I am whichever lawyer is required, Ms. Mercer, on any given Tuesday. Tom arrived at 2:40 in the afternoon in a red pickup truck that needed an oil change. He got out and Daniel Cross met him on the lawn, and the conversation lasted 4 minutes, and at the end of it Tom got back into the truck and drove away. He did not see Lily. He did not see Rachel. Howard Howell, who had been waiting on the porch with 2 folders and a fountain pen, did not have to use either folder. The fountain pen he put back in his coat pocket. He looked, Rachel thought, very slightly disappointed. The story broke on Friday. It broke in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette first, in an article on page 3 of the Sunday section, under the headline, 95 LD Bank Scandal Upended by Documents Found in Pennsylvania Home. The reporter was a woman in her 30s named Aisha Morgan. She had spent 4 days in Westborough and 3 more in the state archives in Harrisburg and 2 phone calls with Howard Howell. The article was careful. It did not name the Hollister family yet. It said only that documentary evidence had emerged that complicated and possibly reversed the official narrative of the 1929 Westborough Citizens Bank collapse. It mentioned a sealed room in the inherited home of a Mercer descendant. It mentioned, in a closing paragraph, that implications for surviving stakeholders were still being assessed. That was the line Howard had given her in exchange for her holding the names back. He had told her, on the record, that the names would come in the second article. She had been satisfied with that arrangement because she was a serious journalist and she understood, if she did not love, the way these stories had to be unrolled in order to be unrolled at all. The article was reprinted by the Associated Press by Sunday afternoon. By Monday, it had been picked up by 3 national outlets. By Tuesday, Rachel had 3 voicemails from CBS News. She did not return them. Howard handled the press. Rachel went to work. She had not yet quit the Hollyhock. She had decided she would not quit the Hollyhock for a little while longer, because quitting it would feel, to her, like an admission that she had become someone else, and she did not yet feel like she had become someone else. She felt like she was, very specifically, the woman who poured coffee at the Hollyhock who happened to also own a chamber of small, dense objects worth $140 million. The chamber was a thing she did at night. The coffee was a thing she did in the mornings. She wanted to keep them in that order for as long as she could. The second Post-Gazette article ran 4 days later. This one had the names. Aisha Morgan had taken those 4 days to verify, with 2 different state archivists and a federal records officer who had taken her seriously, that Edwin Hollister I had been the actual embezzler of the Westborough Citizens Bank in 1929, that he had falsified evidence to incriminate Cornelius Mercer, and that the descendants of his immediate family had retained, across 4 generations, holdings worth in the 8 figures that had been seeded by that original theft. The article ran above the fold on the front page of the Sunday paper. Aisha Morgan had also done her homework on the current Hollister family. She listed Edwin III's seats on 5 local boards. She listed Edwin III's son, a Pittsburgh commercial real estate developer, and his daughter, a partner at a law firm in Philadelphia. She listed the mill on Cherry Street and the 3 commercial parcels adjacent to it, the legal title of which, the article noted with careful neutrality, was now subject to a quiet title action filed by Howard Howell, Esquire, of Westborough. The morning the article ran, Rachel went to the Hollyhock at 5:30 in the morning as usual. The diner was the same diner. The coffee was the same coffee. The woman who had nodded at Rachel 2 weeks before came in at 7:15 and ordered the short stack and the bacon, and when Rachel set down her plate the woman said, very softly, "My grandfather lost the smithy on Elm Street to those people. My father died believing he had lost it because his own father had been a fool. He was not a fool. He was lied to. Thank you." Rachel did not know what to say. She put her hand on the woman's hand for half a second. Then she went on with her morning. By 8 o'clock she had had 3 similar conversations. By 10 she had stopped being able to count them. Doris Bell came out of the kitchen at 10:15 and stood beside Rachel at the coffee station and looked at her, and Rachel realized that Doris had been watching her all morning and had not said anything because she had been waiting to see how Rachel handled it. "You good, hon?" Doris said. "I'm good. You don't have to be here today." "I want to be here today." "That's the right answer." Doris went back to the kitchen. The other reason she did not quit, though she did not say it aloud, was Dale Harrow. He had not been into the Hollyhock since the day Rachel had stopped pouring his coffee in silence and started pouring it without flinching. He had not come in since the AP story ran. Rachel had not seen him for 9 days. She thought about him every morning while she made the coffee. He came back on a Tuesday. He came in at his usual time, 6:15, with the gray scarf he always wore wrapped twice around his neck. He sat at the counter on the 3rd stool from the left, where he always sat. He did not open his newspaper. He waited for Rachel to come to him. She came. She did not say anything. She set down the coffee. He looked at it. He looked at her. He looked at the coffee again. "I owe you a thing," Dale Harrow said, in a voice that was much smaller than his usual voice. "Yes," Rachel said. "I owe you an apology. You owe a lot of people one." "I know." He picked up the coffee. He set it back down without drinking. "My mother lost the farm in 1930, he said. "I told you that." "You did. She lost it because the bank failed. The bank failed because, I was told, Cornelius Mercer ran with the money. I was told that by my mother, who was told it by her father. He believed it. She believed it. I believed it. I have believed it for 73 years. Yes." He looked up at her. "I have been reading the article every day since it came out. I have been reading the second one in the Post-Gazette twice. My grandson, who lives in Philadelphia, sent me a printout of the 3rd one in the mail with a note that said, 'Dad, look at this. He is 61 years old, and I am his father.' I am very sorry for your mother," Rachel said. "I have not yet figured out how to tell my mother," Dale Harrow said. "She has been dead for 41 years. You don't have to tell her. She knows now." Dale Harrow put his hands on the counter. He looked at them for a long time. Then he looked up at Rachel. "I would like to come to your house," he said, "with my grandson, when you are ready. I would like to sit in the front parlor of your house and apologize, in that room, to whatever portion of your aunt and your great-great-grandfather is still in it. I have apologies to make, and I would like to make them in the place they have been waiting to be received." Rachel poured him more coffee. "You can come," she said, "whenever you want." Dale Harrow took a long, shaky breath and picked up his coffee and drank. In the booth in the corner, 2 women Rachel did not know were watching the exchange with the careful, unobtrusive faces of small-town women who have learned to witness a thing without making the witnessing itself the event. One of them caught Rachel's eye. She nodded, just slightly. Rachel nodded back. Dale Harrow came to the house the following Sunday with his grandson. The grandson was a man of about 45 with kind, serious eyes and the soft, careful hands of a public school teacher. They sat in the front parlor on the 2 wingback chairs Beatrice had kept facing the fireplace. Rachel poured them coffee from the same kitchen, in the same china cups, that Beatrice had used for her own quiet life of solitary visits. Lily sat on the rug between the chairs with a coloring book and pretended, with the practiced concentration of a child who knows how to be present in an adult conversation without intruding, to color the same picture of a pony for 40 minutes. Dale Harrow did the speaking. The grandson listened. Rachel listened. "I am 83 years old," Dale Harrow said. "I have been wrong about your family for 73 of those years. I cannot give you back those years. I do not have, frankly, very many of my own years left to offer you. What I have is what I am here to give. I am sorry. I am sorry to you, and I am sorry to your daughter, And I am sorry to every Mercer woman who stood in this room before you and never received this apology from anybody in this town, including me." Rachel did not speak. The grandson, whose name was William, set his coffee cup down very carefully on the side table. "My grandfather," William said, "taught me there were certain families in this town to be careful of. The Mercers were one of them. I now understand that my grandfather was a man who had been carrying a wound he did not know how to set down, and that he passed that wound to me, and that I have, until this month, been passing it to my own daughter. I am here, Ms. Mercer, to tell you that I have stopped passing it." Rachel cried, for the first time since she had read Cornelius's last letter to Beatrice. Quietly, Lily looked up from her coloring book and considered her mother and decided, with the diplomatic seriousness she brought to such judgments, not to interrupt. She went back to her pony. After Dale and William left, Rachel sat in the front parlor for a long time looking at the empty chair where the older man had been sitting. Then she went to the kitchen and washed the 4 cups by hand and dried them and put them away. The Hollisters did not come to her. They went to court instead. Edwin Hollister III, on the advice of Jeffrey Stamp, filed in the 3rd week of November a petition with the Westborough County Orphans Court asserting that the recently surfaced Mercer documents were of disputed provenance and seeking an injunction to prevent any further public disclosure pending review. The petition was a maneuver. Howard Howell explained it to Rachel at her kitchen table. Hollister knew the documents were genuine. He knew because his own family lawyers had reviewed photocopies sent to them in good faith by a federal agent during the early phase of the federal review. The petition was a maneuver because Hollister's only remaining play was delay. If he could delay long enough, he could shape the public narrative, settle out of court, and keep the family from a criminal referral. The hearing was set for the 2nd week of December. Howard Howell took Rachel into the courtroom on the morning of the hearing wearing the same brown wool overcoat he had worn the first day in her house. He sat at the plaintiff's table beside her. Daniel Cross stood by the door. Diane sat in the gallery. Edith Patterson sat behind her. The judge was a woman named Rosalind Mancuso, who Howard had told Rachel was scrupulously fair and could not be bought, which was a phrase Howard apparently used in this county to mean the same thing. Jeffrey Stamp made his argument. He was good. He spoke for 45 minutes. He used the words disputed provenance and responsible disclosure and the legitimate interests of named third parties with the smoothness of a man who had said similar words in similar rooms for 30 years. Howard Howell stood up to respond. He spoke for 9 minutes. He laid the bank ledger on the table in front of the judge. He laid the 4 bundled letters beside it. He laid the small leather book in which Cornelius had documented every dollar in the safe. He laid the original deeds. "Your Honor," he said, "the documents speak for themselves. We do not contest their disclosure. We invite it. Mr. Stamp's clients are concerned that disclosure will damage their interests. With respect, Mr. Stamp's clients' interests are precisely what these documents were preserved to expose. The Commonwealth has, as of last Friday, opened a federal review under the Records Preservation Statutes of 1934. We do not seek delay. We seek truth, which has been delayed 82 years already." He sat down. Judge Mancuso did not deliberate. She did not need to. "The petition is denied," she said. "The documents are admitted into the public record under standard archival protocols. Mr. Stamp, you will explain to your clients that the time for that kind of motion was about 95 years ago." Jeffrey Stamp did not argue. He stood. He nodded. He turned and walked out of the courtroom without looking at Edwin Hollister III, who sat at the defendant's table with his hands folded in his lap and his face very pale. When Rachel and Howard left the courtroom, the maple light of December was thin and bright over the Westborough courthouse steps, and there were 4 reporters waiting at the bottom of the steps, and Howard guided her past them with a hand at her elbow and a quiet, no comment, gentlemen, please." They got into Howard's slate-colored Mercedes and they drove home, and Diane and Edith Patterson followed in Diane's station wagon. And Rachel watched the road go by through the passenger window, and she said, "Finally, that was the easy part." "That was the easy part," Howard agreed. "The hard part was the collection." The collection. What to do with it? It took her 3 weeks of thinking and 1 long conversation with Andrew Pell and a longer conversation with Howard and a longest conversation with Edith Patterson before she decided. She did not consult her sister because her sister had not asked to be consulted, and that, Rachel knew, was Diane's quiet way of saying that this was Rachel's to decide. She made the decision in the chamber, sitting in the leather chair at the desk, with the bundle of Cornelius's letters in front of her, and she said it out loud, alone in the room, as if reading it from a page she had not yet written. The collection would not be broken up. 8 individual pieces, including 2 of the highest value watches, would be sold at auction to fund a foundation. The sales would happen over 5 years. The proceeds, approximately $40 million, would establish the Mercer Family Foundation, dedicated to 2 missions. The first was the preservation and exhibition of the rest of the collection in a small public museum, to be housed in the restored Mercer Bellweather Mill building in downtown Westborough, which Howard's quiet title action had recovered for her in full. The second was a scholarship program for descendants of Westborough Citizens Bank depositors who had lost their savings in 1929. Howard had cross-referenced the original depositor records, recovered from the basement of the state archives, with current Westborough School District enrollment. 312 children currently in Westborough schools had at least one great-grandparent on the depositor list. Every one of them, if they qualified, would have their college paid for. Dale Harrow's grandson, Howard told her, was a public school teacher in Philadelphia. The grandson had a daughter. The daughter was 11. She is on the list, Howard said. Good, Rachel said. The museum would open the following spring, in the restored mill. Free admission. Andrew Pell would serve, by mutual agreement, as the founding curator. Edith Patterson would sit on the board. Diane, who Rachel had asked because Diane had not asked, would handle finances. Lily, when she was old enough, would have whatever role she wanted. The Federal Review took 14 months. The Hollister family, by way of a settlement reached in the federal magistrate's chambers on a March afternoon, returned to Mercer ownership the deeds to the mill, 2 adjacent commercial parcels, and a fund of approximately $11 million that represented an agreed-upon portion of the gains accumulated by the family from the original 1929 fraud. They were permitted to retain their other holdings and were spared, by a thin margin and a great deal of legal work on both sides, criminal referral. Edwin Hollister III resigned from the town council. He moved out of Westborough that summer. The town did not, Edith Patterson reported, miss him. Tom called once more, 2 weeks after the AP story ran. He had a lawyer this time. The lawyer's name was Paul Becht, and he sent Howard Howell a letter on a Friday afternoon describing what he termed Tom Mercer's intention to pursue a reevaluation of the custody arrangement in light of materially changed circumstances. Howard Howell wrote back on the following Monday. His letter was a single page. It contained 3 numbered points. The first was the $18,000 arrears in child support, now updated with statutory interest and penalties. The second was a detailed list of every voicemail and text message Tom had failed to respond to from his daughter over the previous 19 months, complete with dates and copies. The third was a polite suggestion that, before further pursuing this line of inquiry, Mr. Becht might wish to consult with his client about the strategic wisdom of being personally examined under oath regarding the 18 months of his absence. Paul Becht did not write back. Tom called Rachel once, 2 days later, sober, with what Rachel recognized as a real apology in his voice. He asked if he could see Lily. Rachel told him yes, when he was current on his support. She did not tell him to hurry. In April, the town of Westborough held a public meeting at the high school auditorium. It was not a meeting Rachel had called. The mayor, a man named Carl Boudreau who had quietly stayed out of the unfolding scandal for 4 months, and whose careful neutrality, Howard Howell had once observed, was perhaps the most political thing about him, called the meeting himself. The agenda, as printed in the Cherry Street Gazette the week before, said only civic acknowledgement, Mercer family. The auditorium had 300 seats. 600 people came. They stood along the walls. They sat on the steps in the aisles. The fire marshal came and looked at the crowd, and then went outside and locked the back doors to keep more people from coming in. And then he came back and stood by the front doors and stayed for the meeting. Mayor Boudreau spoke first. He spoke for 10 minutes. He said the words that mayors say in such moments. He said that the town had been part of, and party to, a long injustice. He said that the town had repeated a story to itself for 96 years that turned out to be wrong. He said that no formal apology issued from a podium could undo such a thing, but that one was, nevertheless, owed. He said it. Then he asked Rachel to come up. Rachel had not been told she would be asked to come up. She had come because Howard had told her to come, and Edith had told her to come, and Diane, who had now been at the house for 5 months and showed no signs of leaving, had told her she had to come. She had not prepared remarks. She had thought she would sit in the front row and clap politely. She walked up to the podium. The auditorium was very quiet. "I am not a person who gives speeches," she said. "I am, until this month, a waitress at the Hollyhock. I am the great-great-granddaughter of a man you were told to hate for nearly 100 years. I am the daughter, also, of nobody anyone in this room ever met. I want you to know that the only reason any of this came out is because 4 people in this town did not give up. My great-aunt Beatrice, who lived 61 years alone in that house up Bellweather Road waiting for someone she had not yet met. Walter Patterson, who kept records nobody asked him to keep. His grandson, Frank, who could not bring himself to throw them away. And my own daughter, Lily, who is 7 years old and who found, under a floorboard upstairs in the back hallway of that house, a key with our name on it. None of you owe me anything. You owe nothing to me. If you owe anything, you owe it to my great-aunt, and you owe it to Walter Patterson and to the children of the people whose lives were broken in 1929. I am going to do what I can with what I have to make some of that right. Thank you for coming tonight." She sat down. The applause went on for a very long time. In May, Rachel quit the Hollyhock. Doris Bell hugged her at the door and refused to take a 2 weeks' notice and gave her, as a parting gift, the apron Rachel had been wearing for the past 7 months, neatly folded and tied with a ribbon. Rachel wore it that night while she made dinner for Lily and Diane and Edith and Mrs. Patterson's husband, Frank, who had finally been persuaded by his wife to come up to the big house for a meal. After dinner, the 4 adults sat on the porch. Lily was inside, asleep on the front parlor rug under a blanket. The maples on the long drive had come back into leaf. The yard was full of fireflies. The smell of summer in the Allegheny Plateau was the smell of wet grass and cold creek water and wood smoke from someone's chimney far down the valley. Frank Patterson, who had said almost nothing all evening, set his coffee cup down on the porch railing. "Edith," he said. "Yes, you were right. I know." He shook his head and looked at Rachel. "My grandfather," he said, "kept those records in a box behind the cedar chest in my mother's bedroom for 43 years. My mother, when she died, gave them to my father. My father gave them to me. I have had them in my own attic for 31 years. I had stopped looking at them. I had stopped thinking about them. My wife had not stopped thinking about them." Edith Patterson reached across the porch railing and put her hand on her husband's hand. "I knew you would not stop thinking about them," she said. He nodded. Frank Patterson did not cry, but he came close. A bat moved across the yard on its silent, crooked flight. The fireflies, when the bat passed, blinked off and then on again, in a small wave, the way they always did. Rachel watched the yard. She thought of all the people who had stood on this porch. All the Mercers who had looked out across this same long stretch of land in different lights and different seasons. Heinrich, the watchmaker from Geneva, standing here at the end of a day in 1875, watching his small son run between the maples that were then no taller than the boy himself. Cornelius, on his last good evening, in some August of 1928, with a glass of his father's brandy in his hand, not yet knowing what he was about to find in the bank's books. Beatrice, in some dim afternoon in the 1950s or the 1970s, standing at this railing alone, having buried both her parents in the cemetery on the hill, having lost a court case, having lost a reporter, having walked back into the house alone for the 10,000th time, and not yet having given up. It took every one of them to get here, Rachel thought. None of them by themselves. All of them together. And me, only at the end, only because they had carried it as far as they could. She did not say any of that out loud. Edith Patterson, however, looked at her, the way she had been looking at her since the first evening on this porch, the way she looked at her now with a small private smile that said, "I know what you are thinking. I have thought it too. We are friends." "Mrs. Patterson," Rachel said. "Yes. When the museum opens, I would like to put your husband's grandfather's name on it." Frank Patterson's head came up. "I would like the building to be called the Patterson Mercer Mill Museum," Rachel said, "because the truth would not have survived without his records. He kept them for 53 years. He gave them to your husband. Your husband kept them for 31. Without those records, my great-great-grandfather's letters in that chamber would be just letters. Walter Patterson is half of why we are sitting on this porch tonight. Frank Patterson did not speak for a long time. He was a clerk, Frank said finally. He was a clerk in a small bank. He was a witness, Rachel said. Without a witness, there is no truth, only one man's word and another man's denial. Edith Patterson made a small sound that was not quite a sob. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Frank put his hand over hers on the railing. Yes, he said. Yes. Thank you. That night, after everyone had gone home, Rachel walked through the house alone. She had walked through this house alone many nights now. It was the simplest pleasure she knew. She went into the front parlor and turned off the lamp. She went into the back parlor and stood for a minute at the wall with the small carved medallion of the letter M. She did not press it. She did not need to. She knew. Now what was on the other side? Knowing was a thing you could carry without opening every time. She went upstairs. She looked in on Lily. Lily was asleep on her side with one arm thrown over the wooden horse, which had migrated, sometime in the spring, from the desk to the bed. The wooden horse was, Andrew Pell had eventually told her, a Fallowboy's automaton from approximately 1875, worth at auction approximately $14,000. But Rachel had decided some months ago that the wooden horse was not on the auction list and never would be. It was, by formal designation, Lily's. Lily would, when she was older, decide what to do with it. Rachel suspected Lily would keep it. She went to her own bedroom and stood at the window and looked out at the long drive going down between the maples. She thought about the woman who had stood at this same window for 61 years. She thought about the man who had built this house and built the chamber beneath it and died downstairs in the front parlor. She thought about the daughter he had loved and the niece that daughter had chosen, for generations on, to finish what she had not been able to finish. She thought about her own daughter, asleep in the next room, who would grow up in this house, who would walk these floors, who would never have an eviction notice taped to her door. She thought, last, about herself. The woman she had been a year ago, kneeling on the kitchen floor in Bloomfield with the notice in her back pocket, would not have recognized the woman in this window. The woman in this window was not, in any sense the world counts, a different woman. She had not become more clever or more brave or more deserving. She had become only what she had always been, which was a woman who would not let a child of hers go hungry and would not let a man with a name take a thing from her by raising his voice. The world had finally arranged itself in a way that allowed her to be that woman without anybody dying for it. She thought, then, of her great-aunt Beatrice, of the small, thin woman at the door of the porch on a hot afternoon in some August she had only barely lived to remember, of the gray eyes that did not blink very much, of the question, "Are you happy?" Rachel had said yes, then, because she had been. She was happier now, in a way that did not have a word. She would have answered the question differently if Beatrice were standing on the porch right now in the summer dark with the fireflies moving slow across the dead goldenrod of the yard that had now been mowed and tilled and planted. She would have said, "I am the keeper now. I am holding it. It is heavy, and it is light, and it is mine, and it was always going to be mine." She would have said, "Thank you." She would have said, "I forgive him too." The maples moved a little in the dark. The fireflies blinked on and off. In the next room, in the four-poster bed under the faded blue quilt, in a house that had stood at the end of Bellweather Road for 141 years, Lily Mercer turned over in her sleep and breathed out, and the small old wooden horse on the pillow beside her did not move, and the night went on. A year later, on the morning the Patterson-Mercer Mill Museum opened to the public, Rachel stood at the front doors with Lily on one side and Edith on the other, and she watched a line of 314 people stretch down Cherry Street in the May sunshine, waiting to come in for free. She had not told any of them to come. She had not run an ad. She had only put up a small sign in the window of the Hollyhock that said, "Saturday, May 4th, opening day, free admission, all welcome," and that had been enough. Dale Harrow was the third person in line. He took off his hat when he came through the door. He shook Rachel's hand. He did not say anything. He didn't have to. He walked into the first gallery, where 150 years of small mechanical wonders were arranged in lit cases, and he stood in front of the Vichy smoker for a long time, his hands clasped behind his back, the way Andrew Pell had stood in front of the same figure on the first day in the chamber. After a while he moved on. Rachel watched him go. By that afternoon, A line of people who had grown up hearing the same wrong story for 96 years had walked through the doors of the building where the right one was now told. They walked through Heinrich's tools and Cornelius's letters and the gallery of pocket watches under glass and the small dark wood-paneled room at the end, the recreation, exact to the inch, of the chamber Beatrice had kept sealed for 82 years beneath the back parlor of the house on Bellweather Road. In the recreation, a single brass key hung on a small velvet cushion in a case at the far wall. A plaque beside the case read, "To my daughter, from her father, with 100 years of patience." Rachel did not stand near the case. She watched, from a distance, as her daughter, 8 years old now, walked up to it and looked at the key on the cushion and then turned and waved across the gallery at her mother. Rachel waved back. By the time the sun was over the maples on Cherry Street that afternoon, almost 600 people had walked through the museum. The mayor came. Howard Howell came. Doris Bell came in the apron Rachel had given back to her, by way of formal regalia. Frank and Edith Patterson came, and Edith cried twice, and Frank held her hand both times. Diane was there in a Navy suit, organizing volunteers. Andrew Pell came down from Philadelphia with his nephew and stood in the corner like a proud uncle at a wedding, occasionally answering technical questions when someone asked. Dale Harrow came back at 3. He sat on the bench at the end of the recreated chamber gallery for an hour. He did not stand up. He just sat. Rachel went and sat beside him for 10 minutes near the end. Neither of them spoke. Then he patted her hand and stood up slowly and walked back out into the May sunshine. In the small office Rachel had set up at the back of the museum, on the wall behind the desk, she had framed and hung one thing. It was the eviction notice from the apartment in Bloomfield. Notice of eviction proceedings in red ink across the top. The frame was simple oak. The notice was old now, the paper a little yellowed at the edges. Underneath it, on a small brass plate Rachel had made at the same shop in Pittsburgh that made the brass plate for the chamber doorway, she had engraved one line. So that no woman who works in this building forgets. The fireflies that summer were the best she had ever seen. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.